steel, firearms, and the Industrialists crossing into another world. Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction. So please don't attempt real magic, the results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 501: The Situation. Hydra is a large city located in the northeastern part of the Duchy of Eaton, and is also the capital of the duchy. The Duchy of Eaton is a member of the Protestant Alliance. After the outbreak of war, although the Duchy of Eaton did not directly border the Church's territory, it was one of the first countries to support the Bayhorn Alliance, quickly dispatching a force to the Bayhorn Alliance's border to join them. However, when the Church-led Apostolic Army launched a large-scale flanking attack by conquering a number of neutral small states in northern Horn Bay, the Duchy of Eaton, with its weakened military, immediately found itself in a dangerous situation. Just recently, bad news arrived: the Apostolic Army had captured Mata, the most important fortified town in the northern part of the duchy, opening the gates to Hydra. Needless to say, the Apostolic Army is now marching rapidly towards Hydra. The entire city of Hydra was now in chaos. All sorts of rumors, both plausible and unreliable, were spreading through the streets and alleys. Some said the papacy had carried out a massacre in and around Marta, others said they hadn't harmed anyone still willing to follow the church, only arresting Protestants. Still others said the papacy had suffered heavy losses after a series of sieges and was retreating. Rumors swirled, people were restless, and many were taking their families and preparing to flee the city to escape the war. Carriages sped by everywhere, and pedestrians carrying bundles were a common sight. A young mother, kneeling on the ground, screamed in terror. She was tightly clutching a crying baby in her arms. A black carriage was speeding towards her. Just moments before, she had fallen in the middle of the street while dodging another carriage, and the baby she had been holding had rolled onto the road. Without thinking, she had rushed to pick the child up again, but little did she know that a new danger was about to strike. The speed of the carriage left the young mother's mind blank. She couldn't react, seemingly having given up hope, or perhaps she didn't have time to weigh whether to give up on survival. Instinct made her close her eyes tightly and scream uncontrollably. But there was only a loud crash, and the expected carnage didn't happen. The young mother, trembling, opened her eyes to a horrifying scene. Two black horses, each taller than a person, lay on the road, writhing and whimpering in pain. They struggled, trying desperately to get up, but it was futile. Their forelegs were intact, but their hind legs were a bloody mess. A thick, long iron chain had been wrapped around the horses and the carriage, then crashed to the ground. Those around witnessed a fleeting moment. Just as the horses' hooves were about to trample the poor woman's frail body, a thick iron chain suddenly appeared, binding the carriage and horses like a giant black python twisting its body. The horse pulling the carriage was abruptly pulled to a stop by the chain, while the carriage, propelled by inertia, crashed into the back of the horse with a loud thud. The poor horse. To the side and rear of the carriage stood a towering man, easily over 2 meters tall, wearing only gray-green linen trousers, his upper body bare. His brown skin was covered in intricate tattoos. Most striking were his broad shoulders and back, and his incredibly muscular physique. His arms seemed thicker than an adult's thighs. His exaggerated build made him stand there like an inverted triangle. The giant black python chain belonged to the man. He gripped the ends of the chain with both hands, his face expressionless. For the woman who had just escaped danger, the burly man's image seemed even more intimidating than the carriage that had nearly run her over. She hurriedly scrambled to her feet, trembling as she said thank you, and ran off with her child in her arms, not even bothering to brush off the sand clinging to her clothes. The burly man said nothing, but with a flick of his wrist, the chain that had been wrapped around the carriage seemed to come alive, returning to his side and then coiling around his body, making him appear as if he had donned armor. Beside him stood a dark-haired young man who smiled and clapped his hands. "You're as helpful as ever, Sita," the man named Sita replied. "Helping the weak is a virtue, haha." Nathan shrugged. Back at the carriage, the driver was unconscious, and a loud banging came from inside. A moment later, the carriage door was flung open. A middle-aged man dressed in ornate, aristocratic attire leaned out, though he looked disheveled, with crimson blood seeping from his forehead and a large bruise on his left cheek and lip. Who did this? He roared angrily, shouting hoarsely at those around him. The burly man who had rescued him and the young man beside him had vanished. The Grizzly Bear Inn was renowned in Hydra City for its unique architecture and decor. The architecture of the Horn Bay region was generally known for its exquisite elegance and vibrant colors, using wood or high-quality fired red bricks. The inns here naturally followed this style as well. However, the Grizzly Bear Inn, standing in Hydra City's commercial district, was like a giant rock placed in a garden. It was constructed directly from whole blocks of quarried gray mountain rock. The building had 3 floors. The first floor served as a restaurant and tavern, while the second and third floors provided accommodation. Unlike other buildings in Horn Bay with pointed roofs, this building had a flat roof, and even more strangely, it was surrounded by parapets, making the Grizzly Bear Inn resemble a fortress. Merchants and travelers weren't particularly interested in the inn, but it was very popular with adventurers and mercenaries. They believed the building kept them alert and prevented them from being worn down by the bustling life of Horn Bay. Sleeping inside felt amazing, and that's what a real man should stay in. Because of this, when war broke out in Horn Bay, while other inns suffered as merchants and tourists fled for refuge, the Grizzly Bear Inn thrived, fueled by mercenaries and adventurers drawn by the smell of blood. However, no one suspected that the Grizzly Bear Inn was one of the secret strongholds of a certain mage organization in Horn Bay. Sigh, what a bunch of useless fools, Edward complained to a red-haired woman in a room on the 3rd floor, in the southeast corner. The current situation frustrated him greatly. All his hard work had been in vain. Chapter 502 Intervention. Edward paced restlessly around the room, his footsteps creaking on the floor. He swung his arms, making various gestures, his lips moving as if muttering to himself, perhaps this would make him feel better. Sandal watched Edward, remaining silent. He decided it was best not to provoke the pirate captain before him at this moment. His eyes flickered slightly, his gaze falling on another superior in the room. Madame Marianne maintained her usual elegant demeanor, sitting leisurely in a wicker chair, a cup of coffee in her left hand, her right hand casually stirring a small spoon. It seemed as if what was happening in Cape Cod was none of her concern. The sound of footsteps climbing the stairs came from outside, and soon there was a knock on the door. Sandal quickly went to the door, opened a cover to reveal a small hole, peeked outside, and then opened the door. Nathan appeared, and Marianne, who was drinking coffee, looked at her child. Nathan beckoned inside. "Gentlemen, I've brought Sita over." He then stepped into the room, revealing the towering figure behind him. Sita, with a simple, honest expression, bowed slightly and slipped through the doorway. Edward asked, somewhat amused, "Nothing happened on the way, right?" Nathan shrugged, replying with an amused expression, "Aside from a little incident of helping someone, everything went smoothly. Nothing serious." He briefly recounted how they had stopped the carriage on the street. "The driver was probably a nobleman, but we ran in time. He didn't see us." Edward looked at Sita, who remained silent, like a typical, quiet, hard-working farmer from the countryside. Knowing his personality, he asked Nathan directly, "How is the Corner Bay Alliance going? Have those noble gentlemen reached a conclusion?" Nathan, who had been nonchalant just moments before, now wore an expression of frustration. "Don't even mention it, the council is still arguing." From Nathan's exasperated description, everyone learned of the recent events at the top of the alliance. After learning that the papacy's army had bypassed the neutral states to attack their vulnerable northern allies, a fierce argument erupted among the alliance's leaders. One faction argued against intervening in the north and instead focused their forces on attacking the church's territory according to the original plan, heading straight for Collins. The other faction believed troops should be withdrawn and redeployed to the north to deal with the bypassed papacy's army. The two factions were evenly matched in the council, each holding their own opinion. The troops already assembled on the border, without clear instructions, were neither supplying neighboring papacy-controlled areas nor returning to reinforce the northern allies. After listening, Edward gritted his teeth and said, "Since the church's forces have appeared in the north, it means that the church's territory facing the Horn Bay Alliance must be weak. You should take this opportunity to invade." Nathan disagreed with his point of view. "Those neutral states in the north are too weak. A small force can take them down. What if the church's attack in the north is just a feint, and their main force is staying in the east of the Horn Bay Alliance, waiting for the Horn Bay Alliance to transfer its main force to the north before launching a surprise attack? Edward, whether we advance eastward into the interior or go north to rescue our allies?" It's better than staying on the border and doing nothing. Nathan's expression was rather helpless. The most critical thing is that those northern countries that are threatened themselves have already notified their troops who are heading to the Hornby Alliance border to withdraw back home. The Protestant army is on the verge of disintegration. Then let us lend a hand to the northern countries. Ms. Mariana, who had been leisurely drinking coffee nearby, suddenly spoke up. Help? How? Mariana's words surprised everyone. Ahem. You mean donate some money to them and recruit more soldiers? Nathan waved his hand. It's useless. These countries aren't short of money. No, Mariana denied. I mean, we will use the power of magic to intervene directly in the war. For a moment, Nathan thought his mother had something wrong with her head. Come to think of it, by mortal standards, she was really not young. Nathan said hesitantly, well, not to be rude, although we have a precedent of cooperating with mortal regimes like Giles, that was based on years of cautious contact and understanding. The current situation is too critical, it's too late. These countries were recently working with the church to hunt down spellcasters. If we rashly approach those in power and reveal our identities, are you sure they won't tie us up and burn us on the spot? Mariana smiled at her son and said, of course not with others. But I happen to know a ruler in Hornby who has sufficient understanding and tolerance for spellcasters, and whose country wields considerable influence among the coastal nations. Hornby has such a person. Everyone in the room was greatly surprised. Nathan said indignantly, then why didn't he stand up for the spellcaster sooner? Mortals are all the same, none of them are good, Mariana said with a mixture of helplessness and understanding. As the ruler of a nation, one cannot resist the collective will of the people. The people at that time were misled by the church. Even if the monarch was a rational person, he was helpless. Even if he had enough ability to persuade his people, he would face isolation and even hostility from all the other countries in Hornby. The only option was to endure and wait for the right opportunity. When everyone was driven to despair by the church's perverse actions, Nathan still asked with some disdain, oh? Then who is this monarch who has enough understanding and tolerance for the spellcaster? Mariana replied, the ruler of the Duchy of Eton, His Majesty Atia Cabre, the Duchy of Eton. Isn't that the country we're in now? Nathan was surprised. Coming to Hydra, the capital of Eton, was his mother's decision, and it just so happened to be at the moment when the papacy's army was approaching Eton. Had she planned this all along? Then, he asked, how do you know he has a sufficient understanding of us spellcasters? Mariana chuckled, because his wife, Her Highness Helen, the current Grand Duchess of Eton, is a spellcaster. Do you know this Grand Duchess Helen? Of course, because she was my student, and I guided her onto the path of magic. Chapter 503 Intervention 2. With a loud scraping sound, the heavy doors made of cedar wood were slowly pushed open. 2 guards stood on either side of the intricately carved door panels. Light streamed into the previously dark treasure chamber, instantly illuminating the precious variegated stone floor with a path that shimmered with the golden light. A man, leading 4 attendants, slowly entered the treasure chamber along this golden path. The man was tall, dressed in a magnificent velvet robe, his long, curly brown hair cascading down his back. His eyes were bright and deep, and his features exuded a heroic air. Now, with a serious expression, he solemnly followed the light into the depths of the treasure chamber. It's too dark, the man gestured to the guards behind him. Light some candles. The last 2 guards immediately went to the left and right respectively, and using the remaining light from outside, each lit a row of candles that had been placed there. The entire treasure chamber was instantly illuminated, revealing its true form. Exquisite artifacts, boxes of ancient coins, and weapons and armor clearly the work of masters filled the vast room, its walls adorned with priceless paintings. However, the man showed no interest in these treasures, each one worth a fortune. He continued along the central axis of the treasure room until he reached the wall at the far end. Before that wall stood a rectangular table, about 2 meters long and 1 meter wide, upon which rested an object, meticulously covered with a red silk cloth. The man reached out his right hand, pulled back a corner of the cloth, and a chilling glint flashed. Beneath the cloth lay a golden sword rack, upon which rested a simple, ancient-looking longsword. The man grasped the hilt and held the ancient sword before him. My ancestors used this sword to establish the present Duchy of Eton. The man, or rather, the ruler of the Duchy of Eton, Grand Duke Atia Cabre, murmured to himself. Now, I will once again use it to protect the people of Eton. He gripped the longsword and swung it before him, a streak of light appearing in mid-air. Holy sword, Seronimus, Grant us power once more." Suddenly, a familiar voice sounded from behind. "Your Majesty, has the situation become so dangerous?" The voice was gentle and soft, yet carried an unconcealed worry. Grand Duke Cabre turned around, looking at his beautiful wife, Grand Duchess Helen, once hailed as the Pearl of Horn Bay. He frowned and asked, "Helen, what brings you here?" His wife replied, "I know you haven't slept, so I haven't either. I saw you get up, so I followed you." "Alice," Cabre sighed, "I'm sorry to have worried you." Helen came to his side. "What are you saying? You are my husband. How can I be at peace if you are troubled?" Cabre waved for a servant, inserting the ancient longsword into the scabbard held by the servant. The young Grand Duke said worriedly, "The church's army is already close to Hydra. I estimate they'll be at the city walls within a week." Helen asked doubtfully, "Won't our troops be recalled from the Horn Bay Alliance soon?" Her husband, to avoid worrying her, always appeared confident in front of her. If it weren't for someone she trusted telling her the truth today, and her own witnessing the large-scale exodus of people seeking refuge while traveling incognito, she wouldn't have known the situation had deteriorated so drastically. "Ah, men," Cabre said helplessly, shrugging. "It will take them time to return." Gareth wrote that the Horn Bay Alliance initially wouldn't let them leave, refusing to provide them with the supplies needed for their return journey. In the end, Gareth managed to procure a batch of supplies himself before they were allowed to leave. The once formidable Protestant coalition against the Church and the inland nations was on the verge of collapse due to the Church's unsportsmanlike conduct in armed passage against the neutral northern nations. "Your Majesty," Helen's eyes welled with tears. The anxiety revealed by her husband's complete abandonment of pretense pained her deeply. "If it's not working out, then don't fight the Church. We don't care about the Protestants or the old churches anymore. Eton should just quietly maintain its neutrality." "Oh, my dear, you're too naive," Cabre said. "The destruction of neutral countries like Yeb is imminent. The Church is capable of anything to quickly eradicate the heretics along the coast." Of course, Eton's national strength was incomparable to that of small countries like Yeb, so it wasn't impossible for Eton to maintain so-called armed neutrality. However, the Grand Duke had other reasons preventing him from remaining neutral. "Even if we take a step back and assume the Church accepts Eton's neutrality, what about you and Fanny? The Church has been watching you two sisters for a long time, and they already know Fanny's true situation from the incident in Niceburg. If the Church's condition for allowing Eton's neutrality is that I hand over you and Fanny, do you think I can agree to such a condition?" Helen and her sister Fanny, as spellcasters, are thorns in the Church's side. The initial cause of this war was the huge disagreement between the Church and the coastal countries regarding the hunting of wizards. When the disagreement was not obvious or had just begun to emerge, the Church could still choose to endure it because they belonged to the ruling class of a country. But now things have changed. The Church, which has already broken off relations and officially started fighting, will definitely not turn a blind eye to a witch with such status and influence. "Your Majesty," Helen was deeply moved by her husband's words, and tears instantly welled up in her eyes. "Don't worry, Helen, with me here, no one can do anything to you and Fanny." Cabre patted his chest, once again showing the same confident demeanor he had shown in front of his wife. The Grand Duke raised the longsword Seronimus and said, "The power of my ancestors will protect me, and I will use it to kill any enemy who dares to invade." But then he changed his tone, saying, "However, you must promise me that you will take Fanny and leave Hydra for a while, heading south. I have already chosen a guard for you, and once Hydra is safe, you can." "No." Before the Grand Duke could finish speaking, Helen covered her husband's mouth and refused resolutely. "You can send Fanny away, but I must stay by your side." Grand Duke Cabre continued to plead, "Alice, don't be so impulsive, don't worry." Helen looked into her husband's eyes and tried to speak in a light tone, "Someone can help us through this difficult time." Chapter 504 Intervention 3. When Grand Duke Cabre first saw the red-haired woman, he was immediately struck by her beauty. His wife, Helen, hailed as the Pearl of Cape, was already the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, yet this woman named Mariana was in no way inferior to Helen in appearance, and even surpassed her in presence. When he met her gaze, he didn't feel the evasive, slightly timid look that often accompanied an ordinary person meeting a ruler. Instead, he was somewhat awestruck by the power in her eyes. Yes, her eyes possessed a power that could directly affect the soul. People often describe bright, piercing eyes as having torrential eyes, but Mariana's pupils were fiery red. The instant Grand Duke Cabre looked into those eyes, images of flames, lava, and lightning flashed through his mind. She must be a woman of unwavering resolve and strong will, the Grand Duke thought to himself. Your Majesty, this is my mentor. She recently returned to Horn Bay. Grand Duchess Helen introduced to her husband, her demeanor one of utmost respect towards the red-haired lady. Your Majesty Cabre, it is a great honor to meet you. Please forgive my unfamiliarity with court etiquette, Marianne said, giving the Grand Duchess a slight nod in greeting. Cabre quickly replied, not at all. Since you are Helen's mentor, you are naturally my elder. There's no need to observe such formalities. Please, have a seat. Aside from the fact that she was his wife's mentor, she was also a key figure in rescuing Eton from its crisis, so naturally, he had to show her respect. He asked urgently, no amount of pleasantries will help. So, Madame Marianne, let's get straight to the point. You must be aware of Eton's current predicament. Do you have any suggestions on how to help us? Marianne glanced at her student, Helen, and slowly said, magic, magic. Grand Duke Cabre, along with his wife Helen, a spellcaster, were taken aback. The Grand Duchess asked softly, Teacher Marianne, do you mean, to use our abilities to secretly infiltrate the enemy camp and assassinate their high-ranking officials? That's a feasible method, but my husband won't allow me to do it. He's afraid was he really going to have his mentor risk his life for him? No, Marianne denied without hesitation. I mean to use magic to defeat the Holy See's army on the battlefield. The Grand Duke's hands trembled. This, he couldn't utter a complete sentence. Grand Duke Cabre was the ruler of the Duchy of Eton, a top-tier noble family with a history spanning hundreds of years. And what was magic? For thousands of years, it was considered by the people to be an unnatural force, contrary to the teachings of the gods, something that should not exist in the world, evil and defiled. Even though the Grand Duke married a spellcaster and loved her from beginning to end, from the bottom of his heart, in the Grand Duke's eyes, this was the manifestation of the great power of love. In his heart, love was inherently irrational and ineffable, something more mysterious and powerful than magic. In this young Grand Duke's somewhat naive view of love, loving someone meant accepting her completely, tolerating her flaws, even if she was a sorceress who defied the laws of nature. Because of his long-term relationship with his wife, he developed a tolerant and compassionate attitude towards spellcasters. Gradually, he also learned that not all spellcasters were evil, many of them were good people. And they also had the same precious emotions as mortals, such as happiness, joy, pain, and sorrow. Even so, the Grand Duke still couldn't immediately accept magic, to see it as a normal thing, a legitimate means, a form of force that didn't violate the code of chivalry, something to be used openly and honorably to defeat enemies. And what about Grand Duchess Helen? Born into a noble family, pampered and spoiled, she grew up carefree. A dutiful daughter from childhood, she stumbled upon the path of a spellcaster. Magic brought her novelty, excitement, or perhaps a forbidden thrill. She studied and researched magic because it gave her a unique feeling, different from toys she could easily obtain. The contrast between a seemingly weak woman and wielding such power captivated her. Spellcaster was merely one of Helen's labels, not some exclusive, one-to-one bond. Moreover, from a young age, she had been taught by Marianne to hide, and hide again. Her mentor repeatedly reminded her that magic must never be displayed in public, and must never be used in public. If others knew she was a witch, she would face a terrible fate. This subconsciously instilled in Helen a fixed mindset, that magic and being in the presence of people are mutually exclusive. Unless it was someone she knew well, such as her husband or a fellow sorcerer, or an enemy she couldn't recognize and was confident she could eliminate, she should never use magic in the presence of others. However, most importantly, given Helen's current limited understanding of magic, she couldn't comprehend the extent to which such power could influence a large-scale battle. Her most likely guess was that it could be used to assassinate important figures, steal crucial intelligence, or mislead enemy commanders using unnatural means. For these reasons, the Grand Duchess was also greatly surprised when she heard her mentor boast of using magic to defeat an army on the battlefield. Marianne noticed the Grand Duke and Duchess's shock and smiled slightly, a smile that momentarily aligned her image in the Grand Duke's mind with a common perception of an evil witch. Of course, this was only for a moment. The red-haired lady immediately reverted to her dignified and genuinely respectable mentor persona. She parted her red lips and spoke slowly and gently. I know that for a long time, there has been a deep-seated prejudice in the world against magic and against us as spellcasters. It is indeed difficult for you to accept this suddenly. But you have spent so much time with my lovely student, so, tell me, idiot, what kind of person do you think your wife is? I thought I wouldn't have time to write today, but I actually finished. Chapter 505 Intervention 4. My wife, the Grand Duke was taken aback at first, then said with tenderness in his eyes, in my heart, she is of course the most perfect woman in the world. Helen, standing beside him, felt a surge of sweetness in her heart upon hearing her husband's praise. She resolved to do everything in her power to help him through this difficult time, even if it meant revealing her identity as a spellcaster to the world. Mariana said with a smile, that's too broad. I mean, what is her character like? Is she kind or evil, lenient or harsh? Cabre replied seriously, if Helen is evil, then I can't imagine anyone in this world who is good. As soon as he finished speaking, he felt himself being pulled by those fiery red eyes. Although using the word pulled was strange, the Grand Duke truly felt something gripping or binding his soul for a moment. The feeling subsided after a few breaths. However, Grand Duke Cabre did not suspect the witch before him of any mischief, because based on his understanding of spellcasters, an understanding he gleaned from his wife, spellcasters meticulously prepared before casting a spell, preparing materials, runes, magic circles, and at the very least, chanting incantations or making hand gestures, a whole host of things. But this Lady Mariana was visiting the Eton court for the first time and couldn't possibly have prepared anything. The Grand Duke naturally didn't suspect his wife of cooperating with the witch's preparations, even if she was his wife's teacher, and she hadn't said or done anything strange. Therefore, he didn't suspect Mariana. Cabre attributed his peculiar feeling to Lady Mariana's unique aura, an indescribable aura that blended extreme beauty with deadly danger. And then there were her unusual crimson eyes. In fact, the Grand Duke had never seen such a color on anyone else in his entire life. Mariana said, Your Majesty, I can see it in your attitude. Deep down, you have actually eliminated your prejudice against us spellcasters, but something is blocking your heart. What is it? Cabre asked curiously. Cowardice, cowardice. Grand Duke Cabre was somewhat angry. Even though she was his elder, how could she slander a brave knight and a just lord like that? He took a deep breath and said, I'm sorry, I don't feel any cowardice. No, Your Majesty, Mariana said confidently, it is precisely because of cowardice that you dare not confront worldly prejudices. Even if you don't agree with these prejudices in your heart, you can only deceive yourself and numb yourself with self-suggestions such as although I understand spellcasters very well, there are still some resentments deep down that haven't been eradicated. In order to find a connection between yourself and the worldly masses, Teacher Mariana, Helen raised her voice to her mentor. Even she was surprised at how dare she do this. Please don't slander my husband like that. He is a man of noble soul and honest heart, not at all as despicable as you make him out to be. No, my dear. The Grand Duke reached out to stop his wife's defense of him, as if something within him had been awakened. Teacher Mariana is right. I am indeed a coward, I am indeed a wimp. When the church wantonly harmed spellcasters in the name of witch hunts, I backed down, even though I knew in my heart they were good people. When the fanatical masses used ignorance to suppress reason, I backed down. Even though I knew in my heart their actions were unjust, even now, when I rebel against the church, I use other pretexts, but I dare not point out their most unjust act, the senseless harm to innocent spellcasters. I have deeply betrayed my own code of chivalry. I should have upheld justice and protected the weak, but time and again I pretended to be blinded by worldly prejudices, until I even believed it myself. Grand Duke Cabre was agitated, tearing at his hair, his face filled with deep regret. Helen, I don't deserve your love. No, my dear. The Grand Duchess held her husband tightly, trying to calm him down. I know you have your difficulties. What you face is too powerful, something we cannot possibly contend with. Although Helen changed her words in time, she had already stung her husband. Mariana spoke up at the opportune moment. Your Majesty, now is an opportunity. Cabre looked up at her. An opportunity? Yes, an opportunity to practice the true justice deep within your heart, an opportunity to erase your regrets. The Grand Duke looked at her, his eyes hoping she would be more explicit. Lady Marianne's eyes gleamed. In the name of the nation, publicly acknowledge the existence of spellcasters, and recognize their rights as ordinary people. Let spellcasters walk freely in the sunlight without fear of being inexplicably arrested and tortured. Let spellcasters roam the streets, drink in taverns, watch plays in theaters, and join your army, without needing to hide their identities. In short, They have the right to do everything ordinary people can. With the previous groundwork laid, the Grand Duke wasn't too surprised by Marianne's suggestion. Helen, however, asked with uncertainty, if we do this, won't Eton be attacked by other countries? She even imagined the coastal nations and the church uniting to attack Eton. Now is the best time, Mariana explained. The oppressive policies of the Corner Bay Church have stirred up a widespread rebellious sentiment among the coastal nations, from rulers to the common people. It's like an adult telling a child not to do something, but the child stubbornly insists on doing it. Once the war ends, regardless of which side wins, and relations ease, this rebellious sentiment will disappear. Then, such a good opportunity might not come again for hundreds of years. When Eton first recognized the legal status of spellcasters, the allied nations were certainly shocked. However, spellcasters have never done anything to harm the interests of these nations, while the church is genuinely oppressing them. Their choice is self-evident, in particular, when spellcasters can assist your majesty in achieving victory on the battlefield, facing a formidable enemy like the church. Those nations will most likely follow Eton's lead and recognize the status of spellcasters in order to recruit them into their armies. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 506 Intervention 5. Although, with Marianne's guidance, Grand Duke Cabre confronted his deepest fears, the sudden implementation of the measures she proposed still caused him considerable hesitation. Marianne understood his predicament and continued, immediately granting spellcasters all rights is indeed too abrupt. Therefore, you can begin with the army, allowing spellcasters to become a force protecting Eton. After they have achieved certain accomplishments, let your people see their efforts and contributions. On this basis, granting them rights will encounter far less resistance from the people. You are right, Teacher Marianne. If the spellcasters can protect Eton from the ravages of war, the people of Eton are certainly not ungrateful. Grand Duke Cabre was completely impressed by this red-haired lady. She truly lived up to her reputation as the powerful witch who had taught his wife. Mariana smiled slightly. This brings us back to our initial topic, using magic to resolve the current crisis of the Guardians approaching Eton. Helen asked anxiously, but teacher, how can we recruit enough spellcasters in a short time? Thanks to the church's vigorous search over the past few years, many have died, many have fled, and those who are still hiding in Eton are extremely careful to conceal their identities. Even if they are recruited, they will suspect it's a trap. Moreover, not all spellcasters can cast lethal spells, those skilled in combat are few and far between. Most of them are less effective than ordinary soldiers on the battlefield. Mariana confidently replied to her student, since I've come to you, I've already made some preparations. I can gather about 200 spellcasters skilled in combat, 50 spellcasters skilled in enchanting, and some other support spellcasters. I can also contact a nearby mercenary group. These people can gather in Hydra within a week. Oh, so fast. As if grasping at a lifeline, Cabre said gratefully, Teacher Marianne, before you arrived, I thought I could only rely on the Seronimus to face my unknown fate. The Seronimus, Marianne asked, does your majesty mean the sacred sword passed down through generations of the Duchy of Eton? Yes, Grand Duke Cabre's face showed a hint of pride. The sacred sword blessed by the gods, the one my ancestors relied on to carve out the territory of Eton. The Seronimus, the sacred sword of the Duchy of Eton, is one of the legends circulating in Horn Bay. It is said that this magical sword was blessed by the Lord of Light, not only capable of cutting through iron like mud, but also that those who wield it feel their bodies filled with immense power and a vigorous fighting spirit. Of course, the Grand Duke also knew that no matter how skilled one was in martial arts, it wouldn't be of much use in a battle between armies, so even with the sword, he was quite pessimistic. Ha ha ha, Marianne laughed. Grand Duke Cabre and Helen looked at her, puzzled. Your Majesty, please forgive my rudeness. Marianne stopped laughing, regaining her composure. While I don't mean to discourage you, the so-called holy sword Seronimus, it's just an ordinary sword of excellent craftsmanship now. Impossible. Cabre glared at Marianne, somewhat angrily. Several generations of my ancestors used it to defeat enemies stronger than themselves, and they even left behind records describing the sword's wondrous abilities. Marianne, these records are true. In their time, the sword was indeed as wondrous as described, of course, in the eyes of the world. But in your generation, that's not necessarily the case. Cabre was confused. What do you mean? That sword wasn't blessed by the gods. The reason it displayed such power was due to magic. And the magic on that sword had a time limit. By now, its effectiveness should have diminished considerably. Magic? Magic again. How could this be? Cabre was shocked. Had his family always revered an object imbued with magic as a god? If you don't believe me, you can clash the Seronimus with another sword of good quality. I'm sure your treasury is full of fine swords, and see if the Seronimus's blade will chip. If it's as powerful as the legends describe, it shouldn't chip. The Grand Duke's expression shifted. He walked to the table where the holy sword was displayed and slowly stroked the hilt of the Seronimus. Since leaving the treasury, he had kept the Seronimus with him. He suddenly turned to Marianne and asked, "If it's true, how do you know?" Marianne smiled and said, "I heard it from my mentor. The truth about this sword has been passed down in our lineage." Helen tilted her head in confusion. She had never heard her mentor mention this. Of course, it was possible that Marianne hadn't had a chance to tell her before they parted ways. But was Marianne so certain that what her mentor said was true? After all, so much time had passed. Very well, Grand Duke Cabre seemed to have made up his mind. Someone, he summoned the attendant who had been waiting outside. "Go and fetch my Arge." Arge was one of Grand Duke Cabre's most beloved swords, a sharp and fine blade. Within minutes, Arge appeared in the Grand Duke's right hand. With a clang, Cabre drew the holy sword Seronimus with his left hand. He silently examined the sword for a few seconds, then simultaneously exerted force with both hands, the two sharp blades clashing together. Grand Duke Cabre's brows furrowed deeply, and Helen beside him gasped in surprise. Only the red-haired lady seemed to understand. The holy sword Seronimus had actually been nicked by the other sword, and while the other sword also had a nick, it was clearly smaller than Seronimus's. "So that's the truth," the Grand Duke murmured to himself. The holy sword, stripped of its magical enhancement, was actually inferior to an ordinary, fine sword. "Yes, your majesty, that is the truth," Marianne said. "If you allow, I can temporarily restore it to the legendary Seronimus, the divine sword that can cut through iron like mud. Of course, the effect will only last for about a minute. Please, Teacher Mariana." The Grand Duke placed the sword on the table, wanting to witness the magical effects firsthand. Mariana nodded. "As you wish, please stand back a little." The Grand Duke did as she instructed, while Helen watched her intently, observing. And so, Mariana began her work. Her purpose in coming to the Duchy of Eaton had been largely achieved. Next, she would completely subjugate the ruler of the duchy to the power of magic. Chapter 507 Reason 1. Greetings, Marshal MacDonald. My teacher, Mr. Waldrich, instructed me to wait for you here. Kevin looked at the old marshal with reverence as he stepped down from the carriage. Upon arriving in Gabella, MacDonald was among the first notable figures Kevin learned of. He had joined the Imperial Army at a young age, winning countless battles for the Empire, and his name was known throughout the surrounding nations. The unshakable MacDonald, that was his title among his enemies. "Your name is Kevin, isn't it?" MacDonald asked, looking at the young man before him. "Yes, I am Kevin," Kevin replied, both surprised and delighted. He had met MacDonald a few times through his teacher, Mr. Waldrich, who had casually introduced him. He hadn't expected the old marshal to remember his appearance and name. MacDonald smiled at him. "Thank you for your welcome, child. Take me to your teacher." Kevin turned and gestured inside, saying, "This way, Marshal MacDonald." The botanical garden behind the Scholar's Tower was one of the few quiet places in the capital of Gabella. Lush and beautiful, it was a popular spot for the scholars to stroll and relax after their studies. But it wasn't just a place to rest, it was also where the scholars conducted their research. The plants were all cultivated by these scholars themselves. They tirelessly collected rare and exotic plants from all over the continent and transplanted them to this botanical garden. As long as they survived, they could become objects of observation and research for later generations. Over time, it developed into a large garden. Beside a small lake stood a small pavilion, where two elderly scholars were engrossed in a game of chess. "Haha, your king is doomed," Aldrich's junior, Scholar Yarvi, smugly stared at his senior. "Don't be too smug. You haven't figured out I'm holding back yet. You'll be crying later," Scholar Aldrich retorted, his hand frozen on the chessboard, unable to make his supposed move. "Go ahead and make your move," Yarvi taunted, his mustache practically bristling with pride. Just as the game reached a stalemate, Kevin's voice came from the path leading there. Teachers, Marshal MacDonald has arrived. The student's arrival saved Scholar Aldrich from his predicament. Ah, if only Marshal had arrived a few minutes later, I could have seen your adorable defeated expression. Aldrich sighed heavily, his face full of regret. He then stood up, adopting a welcoming posture, clearly not intending to continue the game. Although he was welcoming MacDonald, he first looked gratefully at his dear student. HMPH, Scholar Yarvey rolled his eyes, showing his disdain for his senior. He then stood up and joined his senior in welcoming the old marshal. Oh, MacDonald, you've kept us waiting quite a while. There were no formalities. After all, they had known each other for decades and now served the same emperor. Haha, sorry, I had some urgent military business to attend to. MacDonald smiled apologetically. The three sat down in the pavilion, and Kevin took on the errands, clearing away the chessboard in pieces, and setting out brewed tea and several plates of fruit. Aldrich instructed his student, Kevin, the three of us will be chatting for a while. You don't need to bother with this. Kevin knew their conversation might not be suitable for him, so he bowed and left. After the young man had walked away, MacDonald's smile faded, and he said seriously, Scholars, I know you didn't come to me today for idle chatter. I'm a warrior, and I don't like beating around the bush, so please speak frankly. Aldrich and Yelvy exchanged a smile, and then Aldrich spoke. Marshal, in the past, there were indeed some things we couldn't say, but now we can. After all, we are now supporters of His Highness Antonio. MacDonald nodded at him. Yelvy continued, although you have just sided with His Highness, we feel it's necessary for you to know the whole story as soon as possible. There's a saying, if you want to accomplish something with someone, then don't doubt them, and we wholeheartedly agree with that. Therefore, we chose this time and place to have a frank discussion with you. Hearing the two highly respected scholars say this, MacDonald's expression became even more serious. Gentlemen, Aldrich said, in fact, I was just about to ask why the Minister's Tower, which has always maintained political neutrality since its founding and has never intervened in the struggle for the throne, is now so openly siding with His Highness Antonio. Oh, please don't be hasty, Aldrich replied, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. You will get all the answers you seek. General Simon Fedotov of Collins looked triumphantly at the pass behind him. This was the last obstacle on the way to Hydra. After that, the path would be clear. He stood on a small mound beside the road, from which he could see the pass directly to him. The papacy's soldiers were passing through the gate one after another. His army resembled a long, giant python, passing through a small opening, about to devour a nest of poor little mice hiding inside. After capturing the pass, Fedotov ordered his army to rest for 2 days in preparation for the attack on the great city of Hydra. A vanguard of 3,000 men set out ahead to scout the road and set up camp near Hydra. Fedotov learned from the latest intelligence that the Bayhorn Alliance army, even at this point, was still debating whether to advance east or north. Fedotov nearly laughed himself silly at this. Praise be to the Heavenly Father, the great Lord of Light, who had punished those who had turned their backs on their faith, those who had lost their minds. Fedotov secretly vowed to eradicate those heretics along the coast and sow the seeds of true faith, so that this land might once again be bathed in the glory of the Heavenly Father. All right, he said to his men beside him, let's go catch up with the troops that set out earlier. Hopefully, when we meet them, they'll welcome us with their fortified camp. Fedotov happily spurred his horse, and it galloped southward. Chapter 508 Gods. Lord MacDonald, what are your thoughts on mythology and such? Aldrich suddenly posed this question. MacDonald was taken aback, not understanding why Aldrich would ask such a question. Good heavens, was this supposed to be an academic discussion? But I'm not a scholar from the Tower of Scholars. Did you two great scholars call this roughneck here just to embarrass me? The old marshal complained. He picked up the teacup on the table, blew away the tea leaves floating on the surface, and took a small sip. A bitter yet fragrant sensation filled his mouth. My whole life has been about leading troops into battle. Myths? I heard my mother tell them when I was a child and wouldn't go to sleep. I heard the choir sing them in church when I was older, and maybe I'll tell them to my grandchildren when I'm bored, but what insights do I have? All I can do is listen to others and then tell them to others. I know there are some scholars or theologians who specialize in this. Perhaps you should call these professionals over, the old marshal complained repeatedly, and after finding the tea in his cup not very palatable, he gulped it down in a few large mouthfuls. as if it were alcohol. Lord MacDonald, Yalvi stroked his beard and laughed. So, do you think the stories and myths actually happened, huh? MacDonald was very puzzled. These scholars. I can only say, somewhat tactfully, that some did happen, and some are fabricated or exaggerated, right? Isn't figuring out the truth about this your job as scholars? Why are you asking me? Aldrich said. Alright, let's get to a sensitive topic. Is it coming? MacDonald became serious again. What are your views on the Lord of Light and the Church? MacDonald frowned, pondering both the question itself and Aldrich's intention in asking it. The two meisters didn't urge him to answer, but waited quietly. After a long while, he slowly said, I can only tell you this, I believe in God, I worship God, and I feel that there is indeed a great being behind this world who governs everything. He is omniscient and omnipotent, but, here, the old marshal paused, clearly hesitant to continue. Oh, Lord MacDonald, please speak freely. Your words will not leave our ears once they enter them, Yalvi assured him. MacDonald breathed a sigh of relief and continued, well, with my limited understanding, my view may be wrong. Our God. At this point, the old marshal stopped, his hands gesturing erratically, seemingly unable to find the right words to continue elaborating on his point. According to the Church, our God should be an existence beyond form, or at least beyond the matter we perceive. Therefore, in my view, he is a concept, a rule, a spirit independent of physical existence. I believe the gap between such a great being as God and us mortals is greater than the gap between us mortals and ants. We and ants are both beings dependent on matter. But, do we care how a colony of ants lives? Do we care if the ants make mistakes? Do we care if the ants suffer? Do we care if the ants need our help? And the description of God in the scriptures. He punishes humans for their mistakes, rewards them for their good deeds, and helps them when they encounter difficulties. The God in the scriptures is like a meticulous, overprotective mother, cough cough, heavenly father, please forgive my inappropriate wording. He cares for humanity like a dignified yet warm-hearted patriarch. Marshal MacDonald's words widened the eyes of scholars Aldrich and Yalvi. They hadn't expected such words to come from the mouth of a general leading troops into battle. MacDonald noticed their expressions but didn't interpret their surprise as shock at his unorthodox views. These are just some of my humble thoughts, he said, a rare display of embarrassment on his face as he hurriedly picked up his teacup to cover it up. After all, they were facing a renowned scholar throughout the Empire. At this moment, Aldrich clapped his hands, smiling as he said, very interesting insight, Lord MacDonald. Yarvi added, you needn't worry at all, in fact, we have similar questions. Oh, MacDonald felt relieved. We asked you this because we're worried about your attitude towards the Church, said Yarvi softly. MacDonald replied without hesitation, then I'll answer you both in the same way. You needn't worry at all. My loyalty to the Empire and His Highness Antonio comes before my religious stance. Besides, he paused slightly, but ultimately chose to continue, given my reflections on God, I don't believe an organization composed of mortals can fully represent His will. Your rationality and loyalty impressed me, Lord MacDonald, Yarvi said, his eyes filled with admiration. Now let's return to the content of the myth itself. General Simon Fedotov of Collins stared dumbfounded at the remnants of his defeated army. 3,000 men, a full 3,000. And only a few hundred of you have returned? He roared angrily at his subordinates commanding the vanguard. Just as he was confidently leading his main force towards Hydra, he had encountered a fleeing vanguard on the road. They had actually been defeated. This shocked Fedotov immensely. The vanguard commander was also among the routed soldiers. The poor fellow, named Harper, was in dire straits, much like his army. Harper's cheeks were swollen and bulging, a tattered cloth was wrapped around his head, from which bright red blood seeped. His left eye looked like it had been punched hard, the socket and surrounding area covered in purple bruises. From a distance, he looked like a large pig's head. Fedotov was furious. The Eaton's decision to beat him up and release him instead of finishing him off was a blatant insult. Fedotov grabbed Harper's collar tightly. What happened? How did you all end up like this? Harper burst into tears, utterly humiliated. General, you must avenge us. Speak. We encountered hordes of wizards. Wizards? Harper. Are you mocking me? Or are you making excuses for your defeat? I'm not lying. Harper knelt down with a thud. All my men can testify. Chapter 509 Demon Clan. Lord MacDonald, as a human, You must have heard of the legend that circulates widely throughout the human kingdoms." Aldrich's voice deepened, his expression more solemn than ever before in the decades MacDonald had known him. MacDonald looked at Alvi, Aldrich's junior, whose expression mirrored his senior's. "There are many myths that circulate widely throughout the human kingdoms," MacDonald said, awaiting further elaboration. This time it was Alvi's turn to speak. "The war between humans and demons, the myth of the ancient war between humans and demons," MacDonald asked in surprise. "Yes, that's the myth," Alvi nodded in confirmation. "Does this myth hold any special significance for your Scholar's Tower?" "It holds profound significance not only for our Scholar's Tower, but for the Gabella Empire, and for all of humanity. To put it bluntly, this myth concerns the very survival of our race, that is, humanity itself." This, you mean," Aldrich emphasized, "the demons, our mortal enemies, they, or their threat, still exist." "Demons?" MacDonald stood up. "This ancient, almost mythical, evil race, does it really exist?" "Wait," MacDonald realized they were discussing mythology. He slowly sat back down, a fleeting sense of absurdity washing over him. Demons? The survival of a race? This was something straight out of a fantasy adventure novel. The myths of the war between humans and demons were all similar across the various human kingdoms. In ancient times, the terrifying demons invaded the continent through a sealed gate in the far north. The demons are a terrifying race. They enslave and harm humans, even feeding on them. They are evil beings with whom reason cannot prevail and with whom peace cannot be maintained. Moreover, they possess formidable fighting power and many incredible strengths. Faced with such a tremendous threat, the humans of the continent finally put aside their conflicts and united to resist the demon invasion. After decades of arduous struggle, they finally drove the demons out of the continent, forcing them to flee back to the other side of the sealed gate, a terrifying region known to humans as the Endless Abyss. The so-called sealed gate is a later name. This gate was originally the passage through which the demons entered the continent. After the demons were banished back to the Endless Abyss, the Lord of Light manifested himself amidst the devout prayers of humanity. The Heavenly Father revealed his power to the world, and the passage between the human continent and the Endless Abyss was sunk into the sea. The far north was covered by thick ice and snow, which never melted, becoming a desolate wasteland, even for the demons. Therefore, that passage, which could no longer be found, was called the Sealed Gate. The war between humans and demons is an enduring topic in the human world. Heroes defeated the Demon King and saved the world. Many such stories are based on the ancient myths of the war between humans and demons. Many epics that have survived to this day also originate from this war, which has no official historical record. However, reason told him that these two highly respected scholars had not invited him, a high-ranking general of the empire, to discuss novels or poems. What Yarvi said next surprised him even more. Not only do demons exist, but magic and wizards also exist. Yarvi paused slightly, lowering his voice. For example, His Highness Antonio's mother. MacDonald's eyelids twitched. His Highness's mother, was she really a witch? He had always thought this was a rumor fabricated by others, like the Diaz family, to tarnish His Highness Antonio's reputation. Magic and wizards did exist, and the person he served was the son of a witch. MacDonald's hand, holding his teacup, froze in midair. He was completely stunned. Aldrich and Yarvi didn't continue speaking. They knew this information was quite abrupt for MacDonald, so they waited for the old marshal to react on his own. To their surprise, MacDonald processed the information in just a few seconds. He exhaled softly and then sipped his tea. "Well, Lord MacDonald," asked Yarvi, "now that mythology has become reality, what are your thoughts?" MacDonald replied calmly, "There's still so much I don't know. What I want to know most right now is, what's the connection between the demons, humans, His Highness Antonio, and His Highness's witch mother? Oh, rest assured, although I'm surprised, my loyalty to His Highness remains undiminished." Aldrich and Yarvi both inwardly admired him. Truly a veteran of the Empire, having fought half his life on the battlefield, his mental fortitude was incredible. They had originally wanted to see the old marshal's predicament, but now that hope was dashed. Aldrich looked at MacDonald and said, "Lord MacDonald, the scholars of our Maester's Tower generally believe that mythology is a nation's collective memory. Myths are unlikely to have arisen out of thin air. Over a long period of transmission, they may have been embellished, exaggerated, or even deviated significantly from the original version. However, as long as one traces the clues back to the source, there must be a historical event that actually occurred. That is the origin of the myth, Yalvi explained. Just like a mighty river, many tributaries flow into it, but even the greatest river has a source, even if that source is merely a small lake. MacDonald nodded slightly, indicating his understanding of the two meisters' explanation. Harper, looking utterly unwilling, led his group south. His facial injuries hadn't fully healed, they were still swollen, and almost his entire face was covered in ointment. Having his face stuffed into an iron helmet in this condition was undeniably uncomfortable in the tropical climate of Horn Bay. After the previous rout, his superior, Simon Fedotov, replenished his troops and immediately ordered him to continue leading the vanguard. The honor you lost with your own hands, you will reclaim with your own hands, Fedotov admonished Harper. Harper was grateful to be born into this family, otherwise, Fedotov would have already taken his head. This time, the vanguard was not too far removed from the main force personally commanded by Fedotov, ensuring that the main force could immediately provide support should the vanguard encounter any problems. Even so, Harper was still filled with trepidation. The reason was simple, the psychological trauma left by the last battle was too great. Please vote. Chapter 510 Calamity. The conversation in the pavilion continued. MacDonald asked, "So, you believe the ancient war between humans and demons really happened?" Aldrich confirmed, "Yes, we believe this war really happened." He stood up, walked to the edge of the pavilion, stroked his long beard, and gazed at the nearby lake. "Originally, I was indifferent to whether this myth was true or not, but an accidental discovery 4 years ago forced me to be cautious." "Your accidental discovery?" "Yes." Aldrich turned around, his eyes revealing a mixture of determination, compassion, and unwavering resolve. Combined with his status as the chief scholar of the Maester's Tower, MacDonald felt a sense of awe. The old scholar took out a parchment from his robes, slowly unfolded it, and carefully placed it on the stone table. MacDonald looked at the parchment. It depicted a shooting star, surrounded by strange symbols, perhaps a script he didn't recognize. "What is this?" "A shooting star." "It is a shooting star, but not an ordinary one, or, we should call it the Star of Calamity." "The Star of Calamity? The name itself doesn't sound good." Aldrich's eyes lit up with reminiscence. "It was discovered in an ancient tomb in Zorf," he said. "I was just over 20, a young man who had just entered the Scholar's Tower," MacDonald said. "Zorf? I think I've heard of it. It's somewhere within the Empire." "Yes," Aldrich replied, "but a long-extinct ancient civilization once existed in Zorf, and the contents of this scroll were copied from the walls of one of those tombs. There's much more content, but it's all in writing that ordinary people can't directly understand, so I only showed you the image of this meteor." My mentor at the time, Lord Ortega, took on the task of deciphering this ancient script. Besides the writing on the walls, the tomb contained a large number of ancient parchment scrolls. As his student, I was fortunate enough to participate in this work. As the research progressed, we gradually understood the meaning behind the writing and images on the tomb walls. The general idea is that meteors of this shape and color are omens of disaster. Once they appear in the night sky, terrible natural and man-made calamities will surely occur within the next 100 years. Those ancient scrolls record the specific circumstances of a catastrophe personally experienced by the Zorf civilization. The records left by the Zorf civilization are incomplete. Based on my mentor's experience, he felt there were missing parts, like a beautiful painting missing pieces. However, during the research, my mentor passed away due to illness, and I inherited his last wish, to uncover the true nature of these meteors and continue studying the records left by the Zorf civilization to complete the final puzzle. At that time, I didn't really care much about meteors. I merely considered it a research topic for my independent academic career. After all, which civilization doesn't have one or two prophecies about disasters or the end of the world? And tombs are places that love to create mystery. There are just too many similar things, but because of my mentor's last wish, I still began collecting information about these meteors, attempting to restore the incomplete puzzle. It was during this process that I came into contact with magic and wizards. Oh, just as people imagine them, wizards are always associated with words like ancient and mysterious. And I did indeed obtain many valuable historical materials from them that are not found in the official histories of various countries. I formed a deep friendship with one of the wizards, Seiko Hewitt. Hewitt was the leader of a wizarding organization called the Arcane Order, and he came from a wizarding family with a history spanning thousands of years. The Arcane Order was originally established around the Hewitt family, and almost all of its leaders have come from this family. At this point, Aldrich, who had maintained a serious expression, smiled slightly and looked at MacDonald, saying, "Besides being a wizard and the leader of the Arcane Order, Seiko Hewitt has another identity." "Do you know what it is?" MacDonald's mind raced. He remembered the question he had just asked Aldrich: a demon, a human, His Highness Antonio, and His Highness's witch mother. Is there any connection between these? Let me guess, is this Hewitt related to His Highness Antonio and his mother? Correct, Aldrich nodded. Seiko Hewitt is His Highness Antonio's maternal grandfather. I see, MacDonald understood. Our emperor, the current emperor of the empire, Bartley Griffin, was my student then, and Seiko Hewitt had a daughter, Slona Hewitt. The two were of similar age and, because of their teacher-father relationship, often visited each other, eventually developing feelings for each other. Unfortunately, Bartley had to marry a daughter of the Diaz family as his principal wife for political reasons, while Hewitt's daughter, Slona, could only marry him as a concubine. Aldrich shook his head, saying with regret. At this moment, MacDonald asked, "Does His Majesty know that the woman he loves is a witch?" "As far as I know, he probably doesn't." Both Seiko and Slona have hidden it very well, never revealing a trace to Bartley, especially Slona. She fears that her witchhood will cause Bartley to resent her. MacDonald asked, "So, the claim that His Highness is the son of a witch is likely just a rumor fabricated by someone with ulterior motives, which just happens to coincidentally fit the truth?" "I think so," Aldrich nodded, agreeing with his assessment. That must be the Queen and the Diaz family behind her, MacDonald thought to himself. Prince Antonio's mother also died under mysterious circumstances. Many speculated that she died in a court conspiracy. And what about His Highness's maternal grandfather now? Seiko Hewitt died in the papacy's pursuit. Alice, those two. Aldrich's expression was incredibly sorrowful. At that moment, he thought of his old friend Seiko and the faces of Slona, whom he considered his niece. He knew that it was the unnatural deaths of Hewitt and his daughter that spurred the secret society, which had always adhered to the principle of seclusion, to become more and more organized and aggressive in its actions. Chapter 511 Prophecy. After mourning once more for his wizard friend and his daughter, Aldrich continued, "Through my interactions with Hewitt, I gradually came into contact with his ancient family, a family that has maintained its traditions for over 1,000 years, predating the history of many civilizations. I was delighted to discover that his family possessed a wealth of mysterious and ancient materials. As I mentioned earlier, wizards are always associated with words like mysterious and ancient. These materials covered a wide range of topics, such as the prehistoric war between humans and demons, and the calamity stars I was researching. I was also pleasantly surprised to find that Seiko Hewitt himself was a learned man. He had also studied those mysterious meteors. We felt like kindred spirits. Although my research didn't originate from my initial interest, I had still invested so much effort. We happily exchanged our research findings and collaborated to find new clues. Many clues are ancient texts that no one can decipher, texts that don't understand each other, just like the ones I've collected from all over the continent. This is quite normal. You know, civilizations rise and fall, and many glorious ancient civilizations like Zorf have vanished into the long river of history, leaving only their buried tombs to prove their existence. However, we at least know one thing: this ominous star, as a sign of misfortune, has been feared by civilizations of different regions and eras throughout human history for a considerable period. Through our efforts, the fragmented pieces of the puzzle are gradually coming together. We've confirmed one thing: each time it appears, it's followed by enormous disasters, floods ravaging multiple countries, large-scale wars lasting for years, volcanic eruptions capable of instantly burying a city-state, droughts ravaging the land and causing complete crop failure, and so on and so forth. As you probably know, the decline of the ancient Gabella Empire began with a prolonged drought, and before that terrible drought, yes, that ominous star appeared. Among the materials we've collected is a terrifying prophecy. At this point, Aldrich sighed. It's a pity I didn't pay enough attention back then, otherwise I should have prepared long ago. A prophecy. MacDonald looked at the somewhat remorseful Aldrich. Aldrich said in a low voice, "With the 10th appearance of the calamity, the world will return to its initial chaos, just as it did when it first appeared." MacDonald stroked his beard, somewhat fascinated by what Aldrich was saying. "Have you determined the circumstances of the so-called calamity star's first appearance?" "We found it." Aldrich's face was somewhat pale. "The first trace of the calamity star's appearance was before the ancient war with the demons. In fact, in many of our human languages, words like devil, demon race, demon, evil spirit, and ghost, although expressed and written differently, all contain meanings like chaos, disorder, and immortality, meaning they originate from the same source. Combined with the myth of the war between humans and demons, a myth circulating in almost every country, a shared memory of the human race, we speculate that after the Calamity Star's first appearance, a disaster occurred when the demons invaded the human world. And according to this prophecy, its 10th appearance will foreshadow the legendary demons invading the human world once again. Aldrich grew somewhat dejected. But as I just said, my initial research into the so-called Star of Calamity stemmed solely from my teacher's regret and my own academic interest. Even after deciphering the prophecy, I remained skeptical, given how incredibly ancient it is, so ancient that it has only left faint traces in human history. However, just 4 years ago, the old scholar paused, and his junior colleague remained silent beside him. MacDonald anxiously asked, "Your accidental discovery?" "Yes," the old scholar suddenly exclaimed when MacDonald asked him. 4 years ago, the Star of Calamity described in the ancient Zorf texts actually appeared. Aldrich realized he had lost his composure, took a few slow breaths, and calmed himself down. Then he continued, "Initially, it was the court astrologer, Mr. Isarasi, who was on duty that day, who discovered the star while observing the heavens. However, he simply recorded it as an ordinary celestial object. It was only because he was knowledgeable in astrology that he had never seen a meteor with that shape and color before, so he described it in considerable detail. As for me, thinking back carefully, I did see the meteor that night, but at the moment I saw it, I didn't pay much attention to it. I'm not a scholar of astrology, so I lacked sufficient sensitivity at the time, and at first glance, I simply regarded it as an ordinary meteor. However, after I fell asleep, its image became clearer and clearer in my dreams, eventually waking me from my sleep, and I couldn't fall asleep again." As Aldrich recounted this, MacDonald noticed beads of sweat on the old maester's forehead. "I still remember it very clearly. I felt as if I were driven by a mysterious force, and I rushed to the observatory in the middle of the night, disheveled, to look through the records that Scholar Rossi had just left behind. Poor Rossi, he was on night duty and was startled by my sudden intrusion. According to Rossi later, I threw myself onto his desk and frantically flipped through his notes." Aldrich's voice trembled slightly again, clearly feeling uncomfortable recalling his state at the time. The people in the Scholar's Tower were known for their calm and composure. I carefully examined each page, and finally discovered the harbinger of doom that had gradually become clearer in my dream. The words left by Rossi were exactly the same as the image of that shooting star in my dream. Then I thought of the prophecy again, and all the clues that Siko Huandana had found. Our great enemy is coming. The demons are about to invade this world again. I returned to my residence and began frantically poring over the research materials that had consumed countless hours of my energy, materials that I had then shelved. Those records were no longer just vague legends, but had transformed into chains that seemed to bind my body and soul like death knells. At this point, the old scholar began to ramble incoherently again. Aldrich's junior put his hand on his shoulder. "My respected senior, calm down. Calm down. You are the respected chief scholar of the Scholar's Tower." Chapter 512 Doomsday. Aldrich tried to calm his senior down, preventing him from losing his composure in front of MacDonald. "I'm so sorry, Sir MacDonald. The pressure from the calamity has been immense for me lately," Aldrich said, looking embarrassed. MacDonald made a reassuring gesture, indicating he understood his feelings. The old scholar continued, "I retrieved those documents and made some new discoveries." "New discoveries?" "Yes, they are the notes left by a priest of an ancient civilization, describing a strange dream. According to the note's owner, it was the apocalyptic vision after the 10th appearance of the Star of Calamity." The apocalyptic vision? The extinction of human civilization, although it wasn't explicitly stated, it's close enough. "Let me describe it to you in the language of Gabella," Aldrich then recited in a poetic tone. "When it appeared for the 10th time between heaven and earth, the great destroyer came to this world from the other through a non-existent gate. He created his own kin on earth and forged his army from steel. They wielded weapons that breathed fire, slaughtering all living beings of flesh and blood. The kin celebrated their victory, erecting stone pillars on the earth to worship him. A malevolent black mist spewed from the top of the stone pillars, obscuring the sun, moon, and stars. Nauseating black water flowed from the base, infiltrating rivers and seas. These evil creatures created countless plagues and monsters among humankind. Under the Great Destroyer's ravages, the world descended into chaos, people's minds were corrupted, their thoughts twisted, lofty morality abandoned, perfect order trampled, the era of heroes and wise kings ended, and the old civilization was gone forever. Noble people became lambs to the slaughter, and the once gentle populace became ferocious beasts, viciously attacking their former masters. An era of utter chaos arrived. This was both destruction and, unfortunately, the rest is lost. The old scholar's description was like a chant, presenting a terrifying apocalyptic scene in the form of a ballad. MacDonald's face was grave. These descriptions are what the demons saw after their invasion of the human world. Aldrich nodded. Yes, isn't the destroyer exactly how the demon race is described in various myths about wars between humans and demons? Isn't the non-existent gate the passage sealed by the gods? One day in the future, the sealed gate will open again, and the alien species on the other side will invade our human world again, just as they did in ancient times, and our human civilization will face annihilation. Yes, MacDonald thought. If the future world were truly as described in the old Meester's ballad, how terrifying it would be. His mind wandered, and a panoramic view of the catastrophe unfolded in his mind. The ancient sealed gates reopened, and humanity's ancient enemies reappeared. On one hand, they possessed armies of steel, defeating humanity time and again. On the other hand, they manipulated malevolent witchcraft, polluting the sky and sea with evil, thus eroding humanity's minds. Under the dual blows of body and spirit, the order of the human world began to collapse, morality began to decline, righteous heroes were scorned, wise kings were betrayed, and the hierarchy was completely reversed. Worse still, humanity might be transformed into monsters that knew only how to kill under the influence of black mist and black water. This was not a natural disaster, nor a war between nations. Those things were mere tickles compared to the scene before him. This was the end of all humanity, the collapse of all civilization, and a future world shrouded in darkness. As MacDonald pondered this, he unknowingly broke out in a cold sweat. Then, a glimmer of light flashed through his mind, which was clouded by fear. This glimmer of light made him think of another possibility for the prophecy. Isn't this a bit too alarmist? MacDonald said, frowning. What, you don't believe it? Aldrich and Yarvi asked in unison, their tone somewhat anxious. Oh, no. I believe this prophecy. After all, you have verified that every time a harbinger of doom appears, disaster follows. What I mean is, the old marshal carefully chose his words. If a prophecy is too specific, it makes people less likely to believe its entirety. Then, is the content of the prophecy just a description, an exaggeration, an embellishment, and a prophecy is a metaphor, a symbol? It should be abstracted into, for example, could the prophecy you have verified simply symbolize a great invasion, or, to expand further, an invasion of the human world by a race other than humans, and this race other than humans is not the legendary demon race that no one has ever seen. They live on this continent, neighboring humans. What? Orcs? The moment MacDonald answered with the name of the race, he saw a certain emotion in Aldrich's eyes. It was the arrogance of a scholar, or rather, the conceit of a scholar, as if to say, I am the chief scholar of the scholar's tower, this is knowledge I have verified over most of my life, how dare you, a general who only knows how to lead troops into battle, correct it? MacDonald, of course, wouldn't be angry about this. He was past the age of getting angry easily, and he knew the temperament of these scholars. Besides, the other party was, after all, the most famous scholar in the Empire, and knowledge was always respected. Aldrich's junior, Yarvi, chuckled softly, easing the somewhat awkward atmosphere. An interesting deduction, Lord MacDonald. Thinking about it, it makes sense. With the orcs' customs and social system, if they were to invade the human world and impose their system on humans, it could be called a collapse of order and the end of civilization. But, he looked at MacDonald and said softly, have you ever considered whether the orcs have such great abilities? MacDonald nodded. Yes, I mean, when the time is right, and I see that possibility. Oh? What possibility? Because of my position, I have some understanding of the situation around the Empire, including the vast plains north of the human kingdoms. As far as I know, a new royal tent has been established on the plains, and the Zarg clan is expanding its power, striving to restore the glory of its ancestors. Have you considered how terrifying a force will be created once the new royal tent unites all the orc tribes on the plains? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, It means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 513 Another Formidable Enemy. How terrifying are orcs? Aldrich and Yarvi were somewhat skeptical of MacDonald's argument. For those living in the heart of human civilization, orcs were viewed with a mixture of fear and contempt. The fear stemmed from their public image, a peculiar appearance unlike any other human, immense strength, ruthless cruelty, and a predatory, bandit-like culture, the latter two being reasons for human contempt. Furthermore, while individual orcs were powerful, their race was fragmented. The rise and fall of tribes on the plains was commonplace. The death of a previous chieftain often led to the disintegration of his tribe. This meant that while orcs could organize small, elite groups to raid human territory, they were forced to flee when faced with a large, punitive human army. Furthermore, their weapon-making technology was quite primitive. Orcs could only craft weapons from bones, wood, and stone. If they were lucky enough to acquire a metal weapon or piece of armor, it was considered a family heirloom. In large-scale military operations, it often took the lives of 3 to 5 orc soldiers to kill a well-equipped human soldier, and this refers to actual soldiers, not militiamen who had just put down their hose. However, in the millennial-long conflict between humans and orcs, these alien races did indeed pose a significant threat to humanity on several occasions. When a king with strong charisma emerged, the previously warring tribes would form alliances. They would plunder human artisans as slaves to compensate for their technological deficiencies and would even emulate human nations by establishing large armies. At their peak, the orcs' power even penetrated into what is now human territory. But once they were driven back to the grasslands, they would immediately regress to their pre-powerful state. The original tribal alliances would disintegrate, and they would fight each other for the already scarce resources available on the grasslands. The decline of human nations often takes a period of several decades to a century, while the decline of orcs typically occurs within a decade, plummeting from their peak to their trough. Overall, orcs have been at a disadvantage in their millennial-long struggle against humans, experiencing only occasional moments of glory. This is why the two scholars, Aldrich and Yarvi, didn't connect the prophecy to the orcs. However, MacDonald, a high-ranking officer in the Imperial Army, was different. Compared to the two scholars who favored esoteric knowledge, he focused more on reality and the present. The caravans that went to the grasslands brought us some information. Now MacDonald was the one explaining, while the two White Tower scholars were the listeners. As I just mentioned, the Zarg clan has established a new royal court. This time, they're not just plundering human artisans, they're doing something incredible things. The orcs are creating their own script, and not only that, they seem to be imitating human nations by establishing various court positions. Hearing MacDonald's account, Aldrich and Yarvi exchanged a glance, then burst into laughter. Ha ha ha. This is truly unheard of. Seeing the two scholars so disdainful of the orcs he considered worthy of serious consideration, MacDonald felt a surge of shame and anger. He extended his right hand and tapped the table in front of him with the knuckles of his index finger. Gentlemen, underestimating your opponent comes at a price, especially one who once posed a significant threat to humanity. Compared to the often rumored, unverifiable war between humans and demons, the orc invasion is a fact written in the history books. We apologize, Lord MacDonald. The two scholars tried to suppress their laughter. One of them, Scholar Yarvi, said, "It just makes me shudder at the thought of a group of orc men wrapped in animal skins trying to do arithmetic on their fingers." Well, that is indeed a comical scene, but don't forget that our human ancestors also started out wrapped in animal skins. As scholars, you should know this better than I do, MacDonald said unhappily. The reality is, the Watchers, who once suppressed the orcs for over 100 years, haven't burned the Orcish pastures on the plains for years. They can only cower in the Narradin Valley, watching the Orcish cattle and horses roam freely across the grasslands. And those oasis nations in the desert, it said, are beginning to pay more and more attention to the opinions from the Great Plains, and the influence of the royal tent is no longer confined to the traditional Orcish territory. Hearing MacDonald's account of the orcs, Aldrich frowned and stroked his beard, realizing that he had indeed been somewhat too dismissive. The opinions of the Great Plains? Did I hear that right? The old marshal frowned and said, "You heard right. In fact, this generation of the Royal Council, on the surface, is not as warlike as before. The Royal Council sends envoys to the human countries near the plains to discuss trade, instead of directly attacking and robbing them as before. Even when they want to attack and plunder human territory, they will come up with a bunch of high-sounding reasons, such as envoys being insulted or robbed. Sometimes the orcs even issue challenges to their targets, which is unbelievable. Moreover, human caravans entering the plains are well protected, and they don't have to worry about being robbed as they used to. According to the merchants, they have even encountered high-ranking human officials in the Royal Council. Of course, they work for the orcs. I suppose even scholars like you two have never seen such strange sights in books. Over time, the rulers of the Oasis countries have actually begun to think that the orcs are people they can communicate with. How naive and childish. They have become so ignorant that they cannot see through the disguise of these plains barbarians. MacDonald launched into a long monologue. It's truly incredible. How come they're becoming more and more like human nations? Aldrich stroked his beard, utterly astonished. Indeed, said his junior, Yarvi. These orcs also have the potential to become the prophesied great enemy of humanity. These barbarians can multiply from the grasslands every 10 years or so. They're endless. Their grassland lifestyle makes them natural cavalry and hunters. If they were to acquire the organizational abilities of human nations, they would be a massive disaster. I suddenly thought of an even worse possibility. Aldrich's expression was extremely grim. What possibility? Yarvi and MacDonald both looked at him. What if the demons and orcs come together? Aldrich gave a bitter smile. Chapter 514 Church. This is indeed the worst-case scenario. MacDonald's heart skipped a beat. If, as he said, the appearance of the 10th calamity symbolized invasion rather than a specific enemy, then the scope was much broader. Aldrich was also alarmed by his own conjecture. Therefore, we must prepare for the worst-case scenario with formidable military force. Seeing the two almost stunned, Scholar Yarvi spoke loudly, his powerful voice bringing them back to their senses. Yarvi is right, we must strengthen our forces. Aldrich's eyes regained their sharpness at his junior's reminder. He said, Lord MacDonald, now we shall proceed to the main topic of our conversation today. By this point in their conversation, MacDonald already knew most of the inside story. The struggle for the throne, Prince Antonio's origins, the mysterious wizarding organization, the White Tower's abandonment of neutrality, the legendary demons, the terrifying doomsday prophecy. He had already connected these things. Just as you should be able to imagine now, Aldrich said, his tone now full of sincerity. The White Tower abandoned its long-held political neutrality and joined the struggle for the throne in order to build a powerful force. The most convenient and effective way, a decision we made after careful consideration, is to unite with the wizards. Therefore, we chose His Highness Antonio, who has deep ties to the wizarding world. Of course, I don't deny that my friendship with His Highness Antonio's grandfather, Seco Hewitt, greatly influenced my choice. But, it must be acknowledged that wizards possess power far beyond the reach of mortals. If the invaders of our human world are the legendary demons, and if the demons truly possess the strange abilities described in the legends, then our best weapon against them is the wizards, to defeat magic with magic, and as you know, wizards have a very poor image in the secular world. Due to the Church's long-standing propaganda, they have been misunderstood and even feared by the world. Every wizard must carefully conceal their identity to survive. But they also want to walk openly in the sunlight, so, MacDonald understood immediately. The White Tower craves power, while the wizards crave an open identity. Yes, we're a perfect match, Aldrich nodded in confirmation. He paused, looking at MacDonald. Seeing no disgust or anger on the other's face, he continued reassuringly, Lord MacDonald, do you know how the child you've been caring for was rescued? You mean Johnny? MacDonald was startled, then realized, since the White Tower was on His Highness Antonio's side, it wasn't surprising that they knew about this. Perhaps this wise man had even suggested the rescue to His Highness. MacDonald had asked His Highness how his men had rescued Johnny that night, but His Highness had only vaguely said he would tell him when the time was right. Was the time finally right? Yes, Lord MacDonald, it was that child. Now, let me be frank with you. It was the wizards of the Arcane Society who rescued Johnny. Using their magical powers, they broke through numerous guards, obtained Johnny's location from the mind of a powerful, rigorously trained assassin, and ultimately rescued the child, all while keeping their actions well hidden from the world. If ordinary people had been sent, I mean ordinary people relative to wizards, they couldn't have done it so perfectly. Ordinary people either couldn't have broken through the guards, Or they couldn't have done it so stealthily. It's quite possible they couldn't have done either. After listening to Mr. Aldrich's description, MacDonald nodded in agreement. Lord MacDonald, Aldrich asked, do you think the White Tower's actions are justified? MacDonald stroked his beard and answered honestly, I can't object, at least not. Don't you have any worldly prejudice against spellcasters? That's what wizards call themselves. Oh, specifically, at least I'm not prejudiced against their abilities. Just as weapons are neither good nor evil, the key is whether the person wielding the weapon is good or evil. But, MacDonald questioned, if it's just a small team, it might be fine for assassinations or sabotage, but for large-scale military operations, it seems a bit insufficient. So, Yalvi continued, extending his right hand and clenching it into a fist in midair, we need to use national-level power to support the establishment of an army of wizards to fight against a powerful enemy that is about to arrive. An army of wizards. Yalvi's words made MacDonald feel very incredulous. Such beings are almost legendary in themselves, and to form an entire army? What's more, would the church, or rather the papacy, allow that? MacDonald thought of the most crucial question. Hell, of course they won't allow it, Aldrich sneered, a chilling undertone in his laughter. The church will be the biggest obstacle in our path, Yalvi chimed in. This obstacle must be removed. Remove the church as an obstacle? Despite the numerous shocks he'd already experienced since entering the White Tower, MacDonald was still utterly astonished by the two Meisters' words. To the people of Gabella, the church was the embodiment of God on earth, and behind it was the papacy, a power practically indistinguishable from a strong nation, or perhaps more accurately, the Papal States. Are you serious? MacDonald asked the two Meisters, his face filled with disbelief. Of course, my Lord Marshal. I won't lie to you. You know the Crown Prince is backed by the Diaz family, but who is behind the Diaz family? To tell you the truth, it's the Church of Gabella supporting them. In any case, we must face the behemoth that is the Church of Gabella. It's a huge rock. What? Aldrich saw the fleeting hesitation in MacDonald's eyes. Is your loyalty beginning to waver, my lord? MacDonald was furious. Chapter 515 Testing. MacDonald was furious. He stood up and slammed his hand on the stone table in front of him, making it clang loudly. Aldrich, if you're a warrior, I would demand you come outside and duel with me right now, he roared, his nostrils flaring, before plopping down on the stone bench. His slight panic at the prospect of opposing the papacy wasn't due to his religious beliefs, but rather the calm reaction of a battle-hardened soldier after a thorough assessment of the relative strengths of both sides. Had these scholars, who spent all their time in the White Tower conducting research, lost their minds? Oh, Lord MacDonald, I apologize. I was merely trying to provoke you. I didn't truly doubt your loyalty. Someone as wise as you must have already seen through that, Aldrich apologized with a look of remorse. In fact, you have nothing to worry about. Our strength is not as weak as you think. Our spellcaster companions have already demonstrated their power in various aspects. I think that after you, as an Imperial soldier, witness their abilities, you will be happy to study the military applications of magic. MacDonald paused for a moment. What I am worried about is not the church within the Empire, but the papacy behind it. The papacy is no less powerful than the Empire in every aspect, and it also has the support of fanatical believers throughout the continent. Haha, Lord MacDonald, Yarvi picked up where he left off. Someone will be going ahead of us to wade into the papacy's waters. Who? Horn Bay. MacDonald suddenly realized, could it be that you are behind the recent situation in Horn Bay, orchestrating things? Ahem, Lord MacDonald, it's not you, it's us now. Aldrich reminded him that they were now on the same side. You guessed correctly. The situation in Horn Bay has indeed developed to this point, and we were certainly involved. It will only escalate further until the papacy is dragged into it as well. MacDonald asked doubtfully, can those city-states really withstand the papacy's army? Aldrich stroked his beard and laughed. Hell, Lord MacDonald, don't underestimate those fat merchants of Horn Bay. They've long controlled east-west trade, making a fortune every year. They have the financial resources to support a high-quality army. This is just a matter of lightening their wallets. And once the battle approaches the coast, their true ferocity will be revealed. Many of these merchants are pirates in disguise. In short, if the papacy plunges in head first, they'll suffer heavy losses, and we can keep a close eye on the papacy's actions, assess their strength, and then formulate appropriate countermeasures. MacDonald's expression returned to normal. It's cunning, but it's certainly a prudent strategy for us. Furthermore, Aldrich continued, we will, at the appropriate time, use the name of a nation in Horn Bay to publicly announce the existence of spellcasters, publicly acknowledging their legal status to the entire continent, and see how other nations react. If it doesn't provoke a collective attack, then we will repeat this action in Gabella, after His Highness Antonio ascends the throne. Of course, MacDonald asked, what if it provokes a siege by other nations? Aldrich replied, regardless of the reactions of other nations, it will be beneficial to our plan. Lord MacDonald, you must understand that once the first nation does this, the psychological tolerance or acceptance of the second nation will increase significantly, regardless of whether they agree or disagree. MacDonald was no longer as worried as before. He was now increasingly curious about the so-called secret art, a curiosity mixed with a trace of awe. Oh, and these two in front of him, they were old friends, having accomplished so much without a word. There's one more thing. Does His Majesty know about this? MacDonald asked with some concern. Strictly speaking, the current emperor was the one he should be loyal to. If he knew nothing, wouldn't he, Aldrich, and Yarvi be considered colluding among ministers? No, Aldrich's quick reply made MacDonald tense up. The old scholar said wistfully, Bartley is an upright but rigid man. His personality is ill-suited to the throne. It must be said, this was a product of his father's machinations, to prevent him from posing a threat to his elder brother who should have inherited the throne. But fate caused his brother to die young, and Bartley was forced into the position. Of course, Bartley is very intelligent. Theoretically, he has a thorough grasp of what it takes to be a good ruler, but in practice, he dislikes many of the practices. It's not that his personality is bad, in fact, I quite like and admire it. But if Bartley knew about this, he would definitely try to talk to the papacy. He idealistically believes that, faced with such a momentous event as the survival of humanity, the papacy would abandon its long-standing prejudices and choose to reconcile with the wizards to resist a common enemy. Oh, Lord MacDonald, Aldrich, seeing the look MacDonald cast at him, said, please don't doubt me, for I have subtly proved him. Trust the art of conversation an old scholar of the White Tower possesses when probing the true intentions of others. He shook his head regretfully. Alice, it is precisely this fear that he will be frank with the papacy. If Bartley were like his son, either one would do. How much easier it would be for me. MacDonald hesitated. But in any case, His Majesty is an obstacle we cannot bypass. This country belongs to him, it belongs to him, and in the future, even more so to his son. Aldrich's eyes turned cold, and he said in a low voice, compared to the crisis of the extinction of human civilization, personal feelings and old morals are insignificant. But in any case, I will ensure that the country of Gabella will flow in Bartley's blood. After saying this, a series of emotions flashed across the old scholar's face: sadness, guilt, resolve, and determination. Yarvi patted MacDonald on the shoulder, reassuring him, His Highness Antonio won't make things difficult for his father. He will receive the respect and status he deserves. Please rest assured. MacDonald lowered his head, seemingly lost in thought. After a long while, he raised his head, looked at the two meesters, and said resolutely, Meester Aldrich and Meester Yarvi, thank you for everything you have done for Gabella and for humanity. It has been a great honor to be a part of your cause. Chapter 516 Tax Reform 1. Hansel Abbott hummed a tune as he briskly left his office. Someone from the Lord's Manor had just informed him that Earl Gleman was summoning the heads of all departments of the Council of State for a meeting. Hansel had been in a rather good mood lately. Last month, Earl Gerd Rodney, the heir to the throne, came to Lakeshire to discuss business with his current boss, Paul Gleman, on behalf of the royal family. Initially, Hansel was asked to act as an intermediary, and fortunately, the two earls reached an amicable agreement, with Gerd Rodney leaving a letter of thanks. This flattered Hansel, given Gerd Rodney's high position in the line of succession. As for why Earl Gerd had Hansel act as an intermediary, it was because Sir Hansel Abbott, besides being the Director of Agriculture of the Council of State of Arda, also held another position, the royal representative stationed in the Northwest Bay. Hansel had once been deeply proud of this position, but now he was slowly beginning to understand its true meaning. The so-called Royal Commissioner was most likely a title Princess Catherine, created during the Jingai-Ao City Guard Rebellion. Having nowhere to house the noble sons who had defected from Jingai-Ao to her army to voluntarily serve, she simply coined the name Royal Commissioner to send these nobles scattered across the country, out of sight, out of mind. Otherwise, why hasn't he received a single copper coin in salary yet? Otherwise, why does the intelligence chief and Jingai, nominally the superior of the royal commissioners in various regions, always treat him with such indifference? Sigh, if he were truly a talent Princess Catherine had chosen, he would have been retained in the army, like his old classmate Matthew. After the suppression of the rebellion, Matthew even used his experience to secure a coveted position for himself with a foreign minister. And he, meanwhile, was stuck in the Northwest Bay. Thinking of this, Hansel felt a tightness in his chest, and his steps became heavy. He quickly shook his head, trying to banish these unpleasant memories. His thoughts returned to Count Gerd Rodney, the king's nephew, who was theoretically second in line to the throne, after his father. The current king of Aldo had only 2 daughters, and there was no precedent for a woman inheriting the throne in Aldo's history. Therefore, the crown would most likely fall to the king's brother, and Gerd was the king's brother's eldest son. Barring unforeseen circumstances, the crown would most likely ultimately go to Gerd. He was second in line because if anything happened to Gerd's father, the crown would directly fall to him. This was how it should have been, but Princess Catherine's presence changed the course of events. Even when Hansel was still in the capital, Crystal Radiance, rumors circulated that the king strongly desired his eldest, outstanding daughter to inherit the throne. Would the king change centuries-old tradition for his daughter? If his majesty intended to do so, would the nobles accept his arrangement? Hansel shook his head again, banishing these thoughts from his mind. Whether his majesty the king intended it or not, whether the nobles thought so or not, it was none of his business as a lower-ranking noble, exiled to the frontier and of half-lower blood. His desire to return to the capital, Crystal Radiance, was no longer as fervent as before. In Lancashire town, he was a respected head of the Council of State, one of the top officials appointed by the Lord. But returning to Crystal Radiance would immediately revert him to his former unbearable status, a disgrace to the Aldo nobility. If it were when he first arrived more than 4 years ago, the sight of Arda would have given him a tremendous sense of disillusionment. But now, Arda, no, even the entire Northwest Bay, had undergone a complete transformation. Yes, it was still the kingdom's frontier, but it had become the kingdom's wealthy frontier. Look at the wide, straight avenue running north-south through Lancashire town, paved with uniform, smooth, and even stone slabs. Hansel had never seen such a street in any other city in the kingdom, except for Crystal Radiance. The streets of other cities were mostly dirt roads, with the better ones paved with gravel. After rain, they became muddy and impassable. Even worse was the sanitation. The streets of other cities were littered with almost any kind of garbage, even human and animal excrement. Walking on the streets meant enduring or getting used to the indescribable stench. In contrast, the government of Lakeside Town established a special agency to manage street sanitation, hiring people to clean daily, and enacting laws to severely punish those who damaged public sanitation. Thanks to these strong measures, the sanitation of Lakeside Town streets was, without exaggeration, unparalleled in Aldo. Even the royal capital, Jingai, could hardly match it. On these roads, horse-drawn carts formed a continuous river of traffic. The traffic was so heavy that the government had to formulate what appeared to outsiders to be a very complex traffic rule, and the Ministry of Public Security stationed personnel at various intersections, using a standardized set of hand signals to guide passing vehicles. Lakeside Town is now a thriving city, and not just a static one, but one that continues to prosper. Its manufacturing sector is robust, with new factories and buildings springing up daily, and people arriving from the surrounding areas and beyond to make a living. Of course, the main north-south thoroughfare is primarily busy in the new town on the southern shore of Lake Vis, while the area around Lakeside Town, the true heart of the lake, situated on the small island surrounded by water, remains quite sparse. This is because of the designated administrative district. The original low-rise houses have been replaced by rows of government office buildings, and the original residents have been relocated to the new town, compensated with more luxurious apartments. As the government has grown increasingly large, important departments, such as the Ministry of Industry, the Ministry of Agriculture, and the Ministry of Commerce, have their own independent offices or buildings. For example, the Ministry of Agriculture, under Hansel's jurisdiction, is housed in a 3-story building. The entire building belongs to their agricultural department. Because all the departments are concentrated on a small island, and they are not far from each other, officials can easily stroll around the streets during their breaks from work, exchanging information with people from other departments. It's incredibly convenient. I apologize for the late update, I was quite busy last night. And then, in the early hours of the morning, my child developed a fever, leaving me completely overwhelmed. Chapter 517 Tax Reform 2. Hansel, his mind filled with various thoughts, walked to the gates of the Lord's Manor. The Lord's Manor in Lake Town had just undergone renovations. Lord Gleman had finally decided to spend some money to maintain this ancestral home. The so-called Lord's Manor was actually a small castle, covering about 20 acres, surrounded by a 5 to 6 meter high wall. Inside stood a 3-story stone building, the residence of the successive Earls of Arda. In the past, in the Northwest Bay, sea pirates and land bandits were common, as were wars between lords. Therefore, owning a castle was standard for every lord. A lord's castle was often built in a strategic location such as a cliff. Those without such terrain would dig a moat around the castle. Arda was blessed with a unique advantage, the vast Lake Vis, and a small island just a few dozen meters from its southern shore. The first Earl of Arda chose this island to build his castle, and his followers, who had come to Arda with him, would surround the castle on the island, making it easy to escape any enemy landings. This is the origin of the town of Lakeheart. Centuries passed, and although the castle was occasionally repaired, by the time Paul Gleman ascended the throne, it was still in a state of disrepair. Broken bricks and sections of crumbling walls were everywhere, all revealing the building's age. This state of affairs was clearly unbecoming of the most powerful lord in the Northwest Bay. Therefore, after repeated urging from his followers, the Lord of Arda finally set aside funds to repair his residence. The newly renovated castle had removed many of its defensive features, its design entirely focused on making the inhabitants more comfortable. The windows were larger, letting in more sunlight and making the castle less cold and damp than before. The passageways were wider, facilitating the movement of the Lord's staff. Chief Abbot, the guard at the gate, stamped his heel in greeting to Hansel. Hansel nodded slightly in response, then handed over his access pass, now required to enter the Lord's mansion. The guard checked it carefully, then stepped aside to let Hansel through the castle gates. He followed a flagstone path to the main building. The courtyard wasn't large, and the view outside the castle could be seen from the 3rd floor of the main building. During the renovation of the Lord's Manor, according to Earl Gleman's wishes, it was either a complete overhaul or a major undertaking. He built a new 2-story building in the previously empty backyard near the northern castle wall as his resting place, while the original main castle building was completely transformed into the Lord's workspace and reception area. Hansel glanced up, his gaze settling on the central window on the 3rd floor, noticeably larger than the windows on either side. Inside was Earl Gleman's office, which was actually the original study in the castle. Paul usually spent his time there handling various tasks and occasionally summoning certain people for small meetings. The Lord didn't like to run errands himself, even to the meeting room he personally set up on the 2nd floor. Only when the number of participants was too large for his office would the Lord force himself to go to the meeting room on the 2nd floor. Hansel was wondering whether to go to the 2nd or 3rd floor when he bumped into Sir Bernard Wood Francis, Earl of Gleman's secretary. Bernard was the person Hansel knew best in Lakeheart and even the Northwest Bay, because it was Hansel who recommended him to Paul. Back then, Earl of Gleman was desperately searching for talent to improve his administrative system. Even literacy was enough to meet the Earl's definition of talent. It was under these circumstances that Hansel brought Bernard to his side. Sir Francis, born into a lower-ranking noble family in Crystal Radiance, made a living copying books in the capital. He possessed a remarkable ability, photographic memory. So Paul assigned him to be his secretary. One of Sir Francis's important tasks was to manage Paul's schedule. When the Lord suddenly had an idea, he would call out, "Bernard, write this down for me. On such and such a day, I want to do this and that." Sir Francis would faithfully write down the Lord's thoughts, and then, as the appointed time approached, the Lord would always receive a timely reminder. Both from the same prestigious guild, they were old acquaintances during their school days and now served under the same Lord, forging a close bond between Hansel and Bernard. "Good day, Hansel." "Good day, Bernard." "Our usual spot after get off work." "No problem." They greeted each other with smiles. Although their offices were now separate, they maintained the habit of going to their familiar tavern for a drink every now and then. Hansel asked, "Who else is coming this time?" Bernard replied, "Almost all the department heads are coming, Hansel, so I have to go to the 2nd floor." Bernard, "Yes, you're the first one here. Go wait there." A mischievous grin spread across Hansel's face. What are we going to discuss today? Can you give me a hint? He needed to prepare his answers beforehand in case the Earl brought up work-related matters. Bernard shook his head and said, "This meeting was probably a spur-of-the-moment decision by Lord Gleman. I don't know for sure." "But, what?" "Lord Gleman has been troubled by the sharp decline in fiscal revenue these past few days, and that's probably what was discussed at the meeting." "Alice, it's all because of that damned war at Horn Bay. The Northwest Bay is now heavily reliant on maritime trade, and with the outbreak of fighting at Horn Bay, the Northwest Bay feels as if it has been strangled. Maritime trade and the various industries that depend on it provide a large share of the State Council's tax revenue, but now, due to the impact of the war, this share of tax revenue is shrinking dramatically." "Oh," Hansel feigned distress. "Solving the financial problem boils down to either increasing revenue or cutting expenses. I've long advised the Earl to build fewer schools, fewer roads or reservoirs, or even to get rid of those alchemy swindlers, then the money would be saved." "Haha." Bernard gave a wry smile. "What you're saying is exactly what Lord Griles values, Hansel. If the Earl doesn't want to cut expenses, then he'll have to rack his brains to increase revenue." He seemed thoughtful, and then increasingly felt that this was quite possible. He wondered which fat pig would be slaughtered. Chapter 518 Tax System Reform 3. "Oh. I still need to prepare some materials." Bernard took out his pocket watch and glanced at it. "Go wait in the conference room on the second floor for a while." "Okay, you go ahead and get busy. See you later," Hansel replied, waving goodbye to Bernard. He went up the stairs to the second floor, followed the west corridor to the conference room, and found someone already waiting inside, Steve Fielding, the tax bureau chief who had only taken office 6 months ago. However, saying he only took office 6 months ago is not quite accurate, because Steve Fielding was already one of Arda's tax officials when Paul's father, Old Gleman, was still alive, and he and several other tax officials were under the leadership of Old Ford, the then chief steward. After the current Earl established a Council of State, tax work has not been handled by a separate department, but has continued to be directly managed by Old Ford, who is now the chief steward, and Fielding and other tax officials are still under Old Ford's leadership. Until 6 months ago, Earl Gleman felt the tax work needed a separate agency, so the State Council added a department, the Tax Bureau. At Old Ford's suggestion, Steve Fielding stood out from many tax officials and was appointed head of the Tax Bureau by Earl Gleman. "Good day, Sir Abbot." Seeing Hansel enter the meeting room, Fielding immediately stood up to greet him, showing great respect for Hansel from the royal capital, Crystal Glory. "Good day, Steve. I've told you so many times, just call me Hansel. We're colleagues and friends," Hansel replied somewhat helplessly. "Haha, I've just gotten into the habit of saying it, but don't worry, I've always considered you a friend," Fielding said to Hansel with a smile, scratching his head slightly awkwardly as usual. Hansel sat down next to Fielding and lowered his voice, saying, "Do you think this meeting might be about financial matters?" Fielding replied, "I think it's very likely. Perhaps you already know that the war at Horn Bay has greatly impacted our trade. Judging from the tax data of Port Franklin, our own merchant ships in the Northwest Bay are doing all right, but the number of merchant ships from Horn Bay has decreased by nearly a third compared to last quarter. As far as I know, some have been ordered by their respective countries to stay in port awaiting conscription, while others have been directly conscripted to fight." Hansel and Fielding began to chat, exchanging their intelligence and opinions. During this time, people entered the meeting room one after another: the chief steward of the State Council, Ford; the director of intelligence, Cecil; the director of forestry, Mark Palmer. Surprisingly, Thomas, the chief judge of the Lord's Court, also arrived. Finally, Earl Paul Gleman of Arda and Earl Myron Garnard of Byron entered the meeting room with Bernard. Everyone stood up and bowed to the two earls. Paul waved to the crowd and took his seat at the head of the conference table. Myron sat to his left, and to Paul's right sat the chief executive of the State Council, Vackley Ford. Bernard, as the meeting recorder, sat at a small table behind and to the side of Paul. "Gentlemen," Paul introduced the agenda, holding up a stack of papers. "This is a recent report, and I would like to ask you to take a look." Each person received a copy, which they quickly glanced through. It showed the State Council's revenue and expenditure for the most recent quarter, revealing a large deficit as expected. The reason was obvious: the situation in Cape Bay. The Earl had summoned everyone here. Was he going to redistribute funds to various departments? Everyone wondered. If adjustments were made earlier, Some departments would inevitably have their budgets cut. Everyone was mentally preparing their speeches, trying to highlight the importance of their own department to avoid being targeted by Earl Gryle's axe. Ahem. Seeing the officials' furrowed brows, Paul cleared his throat heavily and said loudly, "I've discussed it with Mellon and Director Ford, and it's not advisable to change any of the current expenditures." Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Since cutting spending is not appropriate, then what we need to do is increase revenue. We must expand the State Council's fiscal revenue. The head of the Intelligence Department, Cecil, thought to himself, "That's easy, just reinstate all those miscellaneous taxes that were abolished in recent years." But the Earl's next words shocked everyone in the meeting room. "After much discussion, we feel that the current tax system is outdated, especially the tax farming system. The tax farming system is a common tax system among humankind. The king or lord does not directly levy taxes on his subjects, but entrusts it to someone in the locality, giving them the amount of tax to collect. Such a person is called a tax farmer. Tax farmers, acting on behalf of the king or lord, levy taxes on the people of their assigned region. They would then hand over the required amount of tax to the king or lord. The tax farmer could then collect an additional amount on top of the original tax, keeping the extra as a reward for their hard work. That was how it was supposed to be, but I've heard a saying," Paul said, his face contorted with indignation. "Pay the Lord enough, leave enough for the people to live, and the rest is yours." My God, listen to that. Leave enough for the people to live. Is that something a human being would say? It's easy to imagine how much the so-called tax farmers profited from it. Paul stood up, gesturing wildly as he paced beside his seat. "So, what you mean is," Hansel asked. Paul said, "abolish the tax farming system and have our tax office send people directly to the countryside to collect taxes." Abolish the tax farming system? A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Cecil asked in surprise, "Well, Your Excellency, what if it causes a backlash? I mean, what if those tax farmers resist your new policy? I don't think they'll just sit idly by and watch their interests suffer. They can't. What reason do they have to continue retaining their privileges?" Paul waved his fist in the air. "So-called tax farming is nothing more than a compromise in a backward social system. In our Arda, Byron, and Emden, there's absolutely no need for such a compromise. In recent years, roads to the towns have been built, and government officials have been stationed in the villages. We can collect taxes ourselves without relying on others." Chapter 519 Tax System Reform 4-Tiered Tax Rates. Or, Paul scanned the assembled officials one by one. "Should we cut the budget of a certain department?" Silence fell over the meeting room. "No. Lord Gleman," Hansel broke the silence first. "I believe abolishing the tax farming system is imperative. Yes, the old system is outdated." We unanimously agree with Lord Gleman's wise decision. The others echoed his sentiments. Cutting departmental budgets? This was simply intolerable. The council was rapidly expanding, and everyone was scrambling to secure more work for their departments to highlight their importance. Sufficient budgets were essential. Who wanted to be sidelined with a reduced budget? Clearly, no one present was willing. It would be better to let those rural landowners suffer. In fact, Earl Gleman's deep-seated aversion to the tax farming system was well known within the council. The Earl had expressed his disgust on numerous occasions and in different places, so his decision today didn't seem too surprising. However, Hansel soon realized a problem. Even if the tax farmers system was abolished, would more taxes be collected? "Lord Gleman," he cautiously posed his question, "are you going to raise the tax rate?" Paul asked blankly. "Raise the tax rate?" Hansel offered an analogy. For example, each person in the territory needed to give the Lord 100 copper shields. With the tax farmers, each person received 110 copper shields. They gave 100 of those to the Lord's manor and kept the remaining 10 for themselves. Now you've abolished the tax farmers and are directly collecting 100 copper shields, but from our perspective, we actually get the same amount as before the tax farmers were abolished. Paul laughed heartily, pointing twice in Hansel's direction, and said, "That is indeed a problem." Fielding, my tax supervisor, what do you think? Fielding considered for a moment, then explained to the crowd, "Sir Abbott's concerns are valid, but theoretically, without tax farmers exploiting the people, the public will have more money left. This extra money will stimulate their consumption, thus promoting market prosperity. This means more goods will circulate and more products will be manufactured, allowing us to collect more taxes from commerce and industry." Many understood. Abolishing tax farmers is only the first part of the reform, Paul continued. The second part is changing the poll tax to property tax and income tax. The poll tax, as everyone knows, involves counting all citizens, regardless of age, gender, wealth, or social status, and each person must pay a certain amount of money. This is the most stable and fundamental source of taxation for the lords of Alder and even His Majesty the King. Therefore, the size of a territory determines the power of a lord. The king's directly controlled territories have the largest population, making the king the most powerful lord in the entire country. Arda has recently focused on developing industry and commerce, taxing goods and manufactured products circulating in the cities. This has reduced the poll tax to a less prominent position. People, after all, cannot be produced in an endless stream like products in factories. However, the poll tax remains one of the important sources of revenue for the government. As for property tax, it already existed in this era and was quite common. You had to pay taxes to the lord for your house, the land you cultivated, and the property you inherited from your parents. There were even miscellaneous taxes such as livestock tax, window tax, and stove tax. In some territories, you even had to pay taxes to the lord for keeping a cat or dog. When Hansel first worked for Paul, one of his important tasks was to investigate the land holdings in the territories, for which he offended many people. After establishing industry and commerce as an important source of revenue, Paul abolished most of the taxes he considered absurd, retaining only land tax, property tax, and inheritance tax. This is a major reason why Arda is more attractive to migrants than other territories. As for income tax, this was something that everyone present was hearing about for the first time. Paul explained that taxes are levied on profits earned by individuals or groups, such as wages and salaries, income from production and business operations, income from contracted or leased operations, remuneration for services, interest, dividends, income from property leasing, income from property transfers, and so on. From now on, everyone here and your subordinates will have to pay taxes on their salaries, Paul reminded everyone. Old Ford said with some concern, this might cause some people to harbor resentment towards Lord Gleman, so everyone should set a good example and provide psychological support to their staff, paying close attention to their opinions. This will be a huge amount of tax, Hansel roughly estimated in his mind and couldn't help but gasp. But then again, Earl Gleman abolished so many miscellaneous taxes and poll taxes. Now that the finances are tight, what's wrong with compensating in other ways? Wait, but the poll tax has been abolished. Whether this income tax can fill the gap and achieve tax revenue growth remains to be seen in practice. Not only Hansel, but everyone present shared similar concerns. If property tax and income tax couldn't compensate for the loss from abolishing the poll tax, wouldn't it be a net loss? Even if they could match the poll tax, it would only be a change in name. What would be the point of the reform? Earl Gleman must have other methods. There's a third aspect to the reform. As expected, Paul continued to announce. Both property tax and income tax will henceforth implement a tiered tax rate. A tiered tax rate? This was the first time anyone had heard of such a description. Except for Mellon and Old Ford, who had discussed the reform with Paul, everyone looked puzzled. Let me explain, Paul explained, observing everyone's expressions. Take personal income tax as an example. A person's income is their tax liability. If their monthly income is less than 1 silver guilder, they don't need to pay tax. If their monthly income is between 1 and 5 silver guilders, they pay 2% tax. If their monthly income is between 5 and 10 silver guilders, they pay 5% tax. If their monthly income is between 10 and 20 silver guilders, they pay 10% tax. If their monthly income is between 20 and 50 silver guilders, they pay 20% tax. If their monthly income is above 50 silver guilders, they pay 40% tax. In short, income is divided into tiers, with different tax rates for each tier. Lower income earners pay less tax or even no tax, while higher income earners pay more tax. The higher the income, the higher the tax burden. Of course, the tax tiers and rates in my example above are just impromptu explanations. The specific tiers and tax rates for each tier require detailed research by the tax authorities to reach a conclusion. As soon as Earl Gleman finished speaking, a bang resounded in the minds of everyone present, as if something had exploded. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 520 Tax Reform. Everyone, except for Myron and Old Ford, was speechless, stunned by Paul's tiered tax rate. Lord Gleman, are you sure you're not robbing me? Ahem, Hansel asked cautiously. Your Excellency, won't you reconsider this tiered tax rate? Paul replied with absolute certainty. This is my final decision. The tax rates at each stage are open to discussion, but this tiered taxation method must be implemented. Seeing the unwavering determination on the Lord's face, everyone knew they couldn't stop him. Looking at the various expressions on everyone's faces, Earl Myron Garnard of Byron stood up. To set a good example, Paul and I have decided to lead by example. Whether it's income tax or a tiered tax system, once the official tax policy is implemented, it will be levied starting with the two of us. Details of each of our tax payments will be posted on the bulletin boards of every city hall. Wow, officials from various departments were surprised. If it were just Lord Gleman setting an example, no one would have thought much of it. After all, people thought Paul was simply transferring taxes to himself. But with Lord Myron Gardner joining in, things were different. It was from this moment that everyone finally realized that Earl Gleman was genuinely working to build a strong and sound public finance system. Paul asked, "Does anyone have any objections?" No one objected. Paul looked at his tax supervisor. "Very well, in that case, the specifics will be left to the Tax Bureau to study. I'll convene everyone for discussion once a draft is ready." Steve Fielding stood up and acknowledged. "As you command, Lord Gleman." Paul then turned to his chief judge, Thomas, and said, "After the new tax policy is implemented, some people will inevitably try to conceal their true wealth and income through various means. We need to further improve the existing legal provisions against tax evasion. The Lord's Court will cooperate closely with the tax department." Lord Gleman, Thomas replied. The meeting on tax reform lasted for more than 2 hours, and Paul only adjourned it near the end of the working hours stipulated by the State Council. Paul returned to his office, plopped down in the executive chair he had specially made. This chair wasn't simply made of hardwood, it was designed in the style of his previous life, with soft foam filing the backrest and seat, making it very comfortable. Since no one else was present, he comfortably propped his legs up on the desk in front of him, rested his hands behind his head, and leaned back lazily in the chair, imagining the scene after the new tax policy was implemented. His secretary, Bernard, pushed open the office door and entered, but Paul didn't change his posture. Bernard wasn't exactly outsider. He, like the old butler Philip, had long been part of the castle. "Oh, Bernard, a glass of wine, please." "Thank you, Lord Gleman." The secretary walked to the table with the wine set, picked up the bottle, poured 2 glasses, and handed one to Paul. Paul took it with one hand, and the glasses clinked slightly in midair, producing a crisp sound. They each took a small sip. "In fact, Lord Gleman, I've always had some questions about you." "Oh, Bernard, since it's been all along, why didn't you ask sooner? You're my closest partner at work, it's all right to ask." Hearing the Earl address him as a partner, Bernard felt very gratified. So he posed his question, "Do you want to become a saint?" "A saint?" Paul was slightly surprised. He didn't understand why his secretary asked this. In what way did he resemble a saint? "Yes, those saints who are willing to dedicate themselves, to burn themselves out." "Oh, Bernard, you mean altruists?" "Altruism? Saints are indeed altruistic. Then I really don't know what I've done to deserve such an assessment." "Look," Bernard said matter-of-factly, "you are so eager to plunder wealth. Forgive me for using the word plunder, but to many, you are indeed somewhat unscrupulous." "But," Bernard emphasized the "but," "do you plunder money to amass wealth?" "No, you are not a miser. You have spent every last penny in your treasury. Do you spend all your money for your own enjoyment?" "No, frankly, your material circumstances can only be described as meager among the Aldo nobility." Bernard put down his wine glass and spread his hands. "You invest so much money in road construction, technological research and development, education, and even generously lend to merchants and factory owners at extremely low interest rates. What is this if not sainthood? What is this if not altruism?" Paul listened to his secretary's words with a smile, shaking his fingers repeatedly with his free hand. "Oh, Bernard, you're mistaken. I'm not as noble as you imagine. Sainthood? Such things are far removed from the essence of my soul." Bernard was taken aback. "You're being modest, Hell, I'm absolutely not being modest, absolutely not. Then there must be a deeper reason driving you to do this. Indeed, there is a deeper reason driving me to do this, Paul replied with a smile. It's for my own material enjoyment. For a moment, Bernard suspected the Earl was playing a trick on him. Lord Gleman, look at the various furnishings in this castle. Are you sure you're enjoying yourself? I know you have doubts, but I'm sorry I can't fully answer your questions right now. Paul looked at Bernard slyly, even somewhat mysteriously. However, the material enjoyment I desire is something that the world today simply cannot provide. Yes, as a lord, I can command a large workforce to do my bidding with a single order, and I can freely extract various products from my territory, but this quantitative change has not yet reached the point of causing a qualitative leap. Seeing Bernard's increasingly confused gaze, Paul continued, the material life I desire requires a combination of conditions, science, technology, systems, ideas, and manpower, high-quality manpower, of course. None of these can be lacking, and they all need to be continuously integrated to achieve the qualitative leap I envision. That's why I'm working so hard to change the world, and every minute I spend money indulging in this current level of material life slows down the process towards that qualitative leap by a minute. Chapter 521 Tax System Reform 6. Is this the reason his lord works so hard, given the material life the world can provide? Bernard pondered this inwardly, but he couldn't imagine it. My lord, forgive my limited understanding, but I truly cannot imagine what you, with your current power and wealth, cannot obtain, if you actually use them. He raised his new question again. Oh, Bernard, Paul said with a hint of pity. I want to be able to communicate with friends thousands of miles away with a simple gesture. Can this world grant me that? I want to browse news from all over the world while eating, and exchange my views with all sorts of people from different parts of the world. Can this world grant me that? I want to record interesting moments in life and images, and savor them repeatedly in my spare time. Can this world grant me that? Hell, Bernard, I know what you're trying to say. Paul waved to stop his secretary from speaking. He continued, yes, you're right. Hiring more people, buying more fast horses, even building more optical base stations, hiring more artists. Couldn't I accomplish what I want? But, I want to be able to hear my friend's voice when I talk to him, and he can hear mine. I want the news I see to be richly illustrated. I want the recorded. If I said I wanted to concentrate everything I want to do into a palm-sized box, operable with one hand, could the world give me such a small box? That's impossible, Bernard exclaimed incredulously upon hearing Paul's fantasy. It's impossible for the world to manufacture such a box. It's the world now, Bernard. Paul embellished Bernard's description, and Bernard saw an incredibly strong confidence emanating from his face. But I think it will be made sooner or later. 100 years? 200 years? 500 years? 1,000 years? It's just a matter of time, and what I want to do is to push this process forward, to make this box, and what it represents, appear in this world as soon as possible. Paul put his feet up on the table again, his tone tinged with melancholy, and said, yes, pessimistically speaking, I may never see it appear in my lifetime, but one must always have some hope, right? The Lord's dream seemed both absurd and real to Bernard. Absurd because he didn't believe such a thing existed, real because of the Lord's confident tone. Considering Earl Gleman's previous inventions, Bernard wasn't sure he could simply dismiss his words as nonsense. The office was silent for a few seconds. Lord Gleman, Bernard decided to stop the previous topic and took out a document, placing it on Paul's desk. Lord Cecil asked me to pass this document on to you before he left, as he had urgent business and couldn't report to you personally. This document contains information on candidates for Alda's envoy to Horn Bay. Paul happily picked up the document. Oh? So fast. As the situation in Horn Bay changed, Paul increasingly felt the need for an official representative to be stationed there. Initially, he considered Lady Sisha, but considering her witch status was too sensitive at this juncture, and also his own slight personal motives, Paul ultimately ruled her out. After much deliberation, he decided to choose from among the people of the Northwest Bay who frequently operated in Horn Bay, especially merchants. He instructed Cecil, the head of the intelligence department, to select a suitable candidate. The reason Cecil was given this task was that the intelligence department had been in contact with merchants from the Northwest Bay who traveled to Horn Bay, requesting them to gather information about Horn Bay within the bounds of conventional means and provide it to the intelligence department. Naturally, The identities and biographies of these merchants were already on file with the intelligence department, so Paul entrusted the selection of the official representative to Cecil. So fast, Cecil probably just picked someone to deal with me, Paul muttered as he opened the file. Friedrich Lister. General Fedotov of Collins watched with satisfaction as his army forced the Etonian army back step by step. A knight in white armor stood out among the Etonians. It was none other than the ruler of the country, Archduke Cabre. Before the battle, according to ancient custom, the two commanders had exchanged names, so Fedotov recognized him. Archduke Cabre was now wielding a uniquely shaped longsword, fighting fiercely, and almost none of the surrounding papacy knights could match him. However, one man's bravery could not change the course of the entire battlefield. The Etonians fought valiantly, but their soldiers were somewhat inexperienced, clearly undertrained, and their coordination was poor. Fedotov guessed that this was because the main force of Eton had joined up with the Hornby Alliance. It seemed the papacy's overall strategy was very successful. Victory was already beckoning him. Ha ha ha, Fedotov couldn't help but laugh out loud. General, your name will henceforth resound throughout the entire Hornby. His subordinate Harper flattered him eagerly. My dear Harper, Fedotov looked at him with a hint of sarcasm. It seems those wizards who defeated you haven't shown up today. A moment of embarrassment flashed across Harper's face. They must have been afraid of your power, General, and ran away beforehand. HMPH. Fedotov didn't doubt that Harper was lying. He believed Harper must have encountered wizards. According to the report from the soldiers who had returned from the vanguard, the group of wizards was led by a burly man wielding a thick iron chain. They seemed unafraid of their own casualties, and as soon as they approached the guardians of the church, they drew their blades and hacked indiscriminately. The swords and blades in the guardians' hands struck their thin leather armor as if they were hitting a metal plate, chipping and breaking off. Now that his main force had pressed forward, they were slowly crushing the hopes of the Etons beneath the walls of Hydra. The wizards still hadn't arrived, and the devout Fedotov believed it was because the power of the Heavenly Father had been bestowed upon him, forcing the wizards to remain hidden. Harper, open your eyes wide and see clearly. Even if those wizards show themselves, it will be too late. Our army will surely suffer heavy losses. Fedotov confidently raised his head and addressed his men. General Fedotov, General Fedotov. A messenger rode madly toward him. Fedotov felt a sudden, inexplicable sense of foreboding. Chapter 522. The situation turns around. General Fedotov. The messenger's horse reared up in front of Fedotov, nearly losing control. The rider almost tumbled off. What happened? Fedotov's ominous premonition grew stronger. Our cavalry, the messenger's voice choked with sobs. Speak. Harper's face contorted, his hands gripping the messenger's clothes, the shadow of the last defeat once again looming over him. Our cavalry is finished. Cavalry? Most of the apostolic nation's cavalry had been hidden behind a mound. According to the pre-battle plan, this main force of cavalry was a reserve. If the apostolic nation's main force was doing well, they would seize the opportunity to strike when the Etons retreated, breaking down the Etons' last psychological defenses, turning their retreat into a rout, and expanding their gains. If the apostolic nation's main force was struggling, they would use the terrain for cover to flank and harass the Etons' formation. Commander Fedotov forced himself to calm down and asked the messenger, "Don't panic, what exactly happened?" The messenger recounted the situation. "We were quietly waiting for your orders behind the mound. Suddenly, flames erupted in the crowd, and not just flames, but also terrible noises. These flames and noises didn't cause much harm to our knights, only a few unlucky ones were burned. But it was terrible for our war horses. These poor animals had never seen anything like it before, and their coats are very flammable." The horses were terrified and no longer obeyed their masters, running wildly behind the mound. The messenger recalled the scene with lingering fear. So many strong war horses, trampling wantonly in the crowd, many warriors were crushed into mincemeat on the spot. Fedotov covered his face in pain. And then, was the situation brought under control? With everyone's efforts, the horses calmed down a bit, but they were still quite unruly. We were trying our best to soothe them when a group of people charged towards us. Some were on horseback, some on foot, and they didn't seem to be in formation. We thought it was a small detachment of Etonians, so we immediately organized our men to defend against their attack. But then, strange flashes and noises appeared again, and the horses panicked once more. We were attacked in this extremely chaotic situation, and then, the messenger stammered, We were scattered by them. I rushed here to report to you. Damn it, how many people were in that group? There was so much smoke at the time that I couldn't make a precise estimate, but I estimate there were more than 500. More than 500? More than 500 people wiped you out. Fedotov was furious. The situation was chaotic, and those leading the group were like demons from hell. Our swords couldn't even scratch them, especially the leader, who wielded a huge iron chain, each swing reaping a large number of lives, the messenger described in horror. A demon wielding an iron chain. Harper's body twitched. He recalled his previous horrific defeat, when that same chain demon had charged into his ranks, slaughtering his soldiers like butter. General, Harper looked at his superior, Fedotov, hoping for further instructions. Fedotov was conflicted. Should he withdraw the infantry currently engaged in battle to rescue his cavalry? This was a valuable force, and in every battle, Fedotov was reluctant to let the cavalry lead the charge. Instead, using the infantry as cannon fodder to weaken the enemy before unleashing the cavalry for a decisive blow. This time was no different, but unexpectedly, it was the cavalry in the rear who encountered the crisis first. Putting aside the fact that this cavalry force is formidable in combat, and its members are mostly knights and noble sons, if they were to fall into their hands, the consequences upon their return would be dire. But what would be the consequences of simply withdrawing the infantry, who are locked in a stalemate with the enemy? What if some idiot misunderstood their orders and shouted, "The church's defenders have been defeated"? Wouldn't it mean utter ruin? He looked at the mound that had previously sheltered the cavalry, where a faint smoke still lingered. "Pass on my orders," Fedotov roared. "Encourage the troops at the front to fight fiercely. If the battle is ended within half an hour, everyone will be rewarded with 10 gold coins, no, 50, Harper. You immediately take men and gather the cavalry." Fedotov's eyes blazed with fury, scorching his men. Harper, whose fear of him surpassed even that of the chain demon, trembled before roaring, "Yes, General." "The rest of you." Fedotov turned his horse, quickly scanning his surroundings. He still had about 600 or 700 men with him. Beware of a possible Etona ambush, he now pinned his hopes on quickly ending the current battle so he could send his main infantry force to deal with that strange force. The order for a 50 gold coin reward was relayed to the infantry fighting, and as Fedotov had hoped, morale soared, and the soldiers swung their weapons with even greater vigor. However, to his surprise, the Eton army, which had been in a steady retreat, suddenly reversed its decline and its morale rebounded. "Damn it, do they know our cavalry is in trouble? Damn it," Fedotov cursed. With a sharp sound of a sword being drawn, Fedotov drew his own sword. "Gentlemen," he roared at his men, "now is the most crucial moment. This battle will determine the success or failure of our expedition. Whether we return as heroes to enjoy the glory of victory or as defeated soldiers to suffer the shame of defeat, it all depends on this moment. I order everyone to follow me closely and charge the Etons. Do you see that man in white helmet and armor? That is the Grand Duke of Eton. He is our primary target. Anyone who captures or kills him will be rewarded. I will personally report to His Majesty the King and the Archbishop. Titles, wealth, beauties, you can have as much as you want." After this pep talk, Fedotov raised his sword high. "Now I command, charge." He squeezed his horse's belly with all his might, and he and his horse shot forward like an arrow. Those who had stayed behind with him, all with their own mounts, followed Fedotov and charged towards the Eton army. Fedotov, leading his charge, failed to notice a troop emerging from behind the mound where he had previously concealed his cavalry, creeping along their path. Meanwhile, above the Eton infantry engaged in battle, a terrifying heat was gathering. Chapter 523 Tax System Reform 7. The news that Lord Alda was going to abolish tax farming and levy income tax swept across the Northwest Bay like a whirlwind. Nowadays, the Government Council or the Lord's Court usually releases information beforehand when promulgating new policies or regulations to gauge public opinion. What? This is impossible, in a manner. Fergus, a knight of the Gleman family who had left when Paul was building his new army, exclaimed in astonishment upon hearing his steward's report of the news he had gathered from the city. "Lord Gleman isn't that kind of cruel lord, this must be a rumor." Fergus shook his head. Abolishing tax farming was understandable, but levying income tax on the rich was a bit much. Wasn't that robbery? Someone must be slandering Lord Gleman's reputation. If I find out, I'll never forgive them. Fergus clenched his fists angrily. But Fergus wasn't entirely sure, because according to his friends in the Government Council, Earl Paul Gleman had wanted to push for similar reforms long ago, but had been dissuaded by Steward Ford on the grounds that the conditions weren't right. Just then, a servant came to report, "Your Excellency, Lord Warren invites you to a banquet at his estate this afternoon." Old Warren. Fergus was slightly surprised. He had just met with Old Warren 2 days ago. Why was he being invited to another banquet so soon? Could the rumor be true? Did Earl Gleman feel the conditions were ripe to push for reform? Was Steward Ford not trying to dissuade him this time? Old Warren wanted to discuss something with him. "Prepare my horses, I'll be there immediately," Fergus decided immediately. Lord Gleman. Inside the Lord's Manor in Lakeshire, Bernard placed a stack of envelopes on Paul's shore. "They're all for you. Some are written in private, some are joint letters, some are from merchants, some from gentry." Paul raised an eyebrow and said, "HMPH, I don't need to read them to know what they wrote." He impatiently opened each envelope one by one. When Paul finished reading the last letter, he exclaimed, both angry and amused, "Ha, look, Bernard. I told you, everyone's just trying to hold on to their own little bit of power and interests." Bernard took a sheet of paper from Paul. It was indeed full of advice against abolishing the tax farming system and levying income tax. "Bernard, write me an open letter responding to all the questions raised in this joint letter." "Yes, Lord Gleman." Paul listed the key points of his reply. "To be specific, we need to explain the significance of our current tax system. The money we collect is used for the following. First, the construction and maintenance of public facilities, such as roads, bridges, canals, and dams. These facilities are related to the interests of all citizens, including them, for their travel, irrigation, and freight transport. Who hasn't used the facilities built with tax revenue? Second, the salaries of public service personnel, such as the clerks at various administrative points, who handle population statistics, legal cases, and various taxes." Paul paused, hesitated for a moment, and then waved his hand, saying, "Never mind, let's not talk about these. I doubt they'd like to hear about them." Third, education and science and technology expenditures. This also doesn't need to be explained. I doubt many people understand it or want to understand it. Fourth, the development of the armed forces. Strong military power is the fundamental guarantee for protecting all people in the territory from the covetousness of outsiders. They should understand this, he concluded. In short, make a big deal out of public infrastructure and armed forces construction. Anyone who opposes it is an enemy of the interests of all the residents of the territory. And it must be made clear that the taxes collected will absolutely not be used for the Lord's personal enjoyment. Bernard took a quill pen and wrote everything down on a piece of white paper. "Lord Gleman, I will finish this open letter as soon as possible, print several copies and post them on the notice board." Yes, at this moment, a pungent smell wafted into Paul's office through the window on the south wall. "Damn it. What's that smell? It stinks." Paul immediately covered his nose, and Bernard did the same. This smell reminded him of his experience visiting the saltpeter fields built by the alchemists, stinky and nauseating. They both turned their gazes south through the window. Inside the castle, everything seemed normal. But when their gaze swept over the walls to the main street outside, they saw a cargo wagon overturned on the road, some contents spilled everywhere. Two men dressed as coachmen were frantically trying to right the wagon, one attempting to right it, the other shoveling the spilled contents. The Lord's guards, stationed at the castle gates, surrounded the two men, watching their actions. A short while later, the guards bound the two coaches. "What's going on? It's just a wagon that overturned. Why are they being tied up?" Paul exclaimed in surprise. "Bernard, go over there and ask what happened. Find out why they were arresting people." "Yes, sir," Bernard responded and went off. A short while later, the secretary returned with a detailed account of the incident. However, his expression was very strange, and he hesitated before saying, "That wagon, it was a manure cart." "A manure cart." Paul's expression also darkened. "Yes, your guards are preparing to throw those two coachmen into jail for disrespecting the Lord." Paul raised his arm. "Just because they accidentally overturned their carriage at my doorstep? Ridiculous. Go tell them to release them immediately." "No," his captain of the guard, Victor, burst in without knocking. "Why, Victor?" Paul asked, bewildered. Victor said angrily, "I believe this is a deliberate provocation against you. Nothing like this has ever happened before." "A deliberate provocation?" "Yes, or rather, a warning. Lord Griles, Think about your upcoming tax reforms, Victor reminded him. Paul's heart tightened. He suddenly realized his captain of the guard was absolutely right. Then go and interrogate those 2 coachmen. See if anyone is behind this. If it was just an accident, release them, Victor said. My lord, I will carry out your orders, but I don't think we'll get anything useful out of them. Whoever dared to do this must be very well hidden. Perhaps the carriage was tampered with, and the 2 coachmen were unaware of it. So I suggest. What do you suggest? I suggest that no matter what you find out, you should behead those 2 coachmen and display their heads to deter those behind the scenes. Bernard chimed in. Captain Victor's suggestion makes a lot of sense. I think you can consider it. Paul didn't respond immediately, just stared at the 2 of them for a few seconds. I've considered it, and the result is, no. Victor. Interrogate these 2 according to my orders. If you can't get anything out of them, release them. Yes, my lord, the captain of the guard bowed and accepted the order. Chapter 524 Coercion. In the dimly lit room, a small cluster of candlelight cast a faint glow, preventing complete darkness. By this dim light, one could glimpse the portraits adorning the walls. A hand, like a withered branch, holding scissors, reached to the candle and snapped the wick. The candle shone brighter, illuminating the face of the hand's owner, an elderly man with a face covered in wrinkles, his eyelids drooping and almost completely obscuring his eyes, as if he were perpetually closed. Alice, the old man sighed helplessly. Child, do you see all these portraits? Yes, grandfather, a very young voice responded. The speaker stood in the shadows by the wall, tall and upright, as if trained for a long time, standing motionless like a pine tree. Our ancestors are watching you, I can feel their gaze. The old man nodded in satisfaction. He approached a wall covered with portraits, and perhaps noticing dust on one, he took out a handkerchief and carefully wiped it clean. As he wiped, the old man spoke softly. Since recorded history, our family has lived and thrived in this village. We are rooted in this land. We are the fruit of this land. We are the children of this land. I have always firmly believed that nature has its own order, the world has its own laws, and human ethics are part of this innate order and law. Therefore, in our society, there is a distinction between the noble and the lowly, just as the heavens forever cover the earth, and our family. His gaze swept across the portraits. In this land, we undoubtedly belong to the noble. For hundreds of years, we have protected this land, we have developed this land, we have managed this land. The prosperity of the village is inseparable from the hard work of our family. Under our management, the people here are simple and honest, living in peace and contentment. The old man's words caused the man by the wall to tremble slightly, revealing his inner excitement. Grandfather, I have always been proud of my family. The old man nodded. The family is also proud to have such an outstanding child as you, but he immediately changed his tone, his voice even carrying a hint of ferocity. Now, someone wants to destroy the existing perfect order, attempting to lead this peaceful village into a chaotic and disorderly future. Oh, the old man sighed painfully. This is a disaster. This is the collapse of civilization. This is against the way of nature. The young man's body trembled violently, but this time not with excitement, but with fear. He realized what his grandfather was about to say. Earl Gleman, our lord, the old man's voice choked with emotion. A member of the noble class in our world, yet he wants to destroy this order. So unwise, so unwise. The old man repeated this several times. He can't even see that it is the current order that supports the Griles family's throne? Can't he see that his attempt to destroy the order will inevitably backfire? My child, do you know? Over 100 years ago, when the ancestors of the Griles family arrived in the Northwest Bay, they were nominally lords of Arda, but in reality, they were convicts exiled here by the kingdom. They were alone, without relatives or friends, and ostracized by neighboring lord families. It was families like ours, who grew up on this land, who helped the Griles family establish itself in the Northwest Bay. It was the local families in each village who collectively forged the Griles family's lordly throne. The old man shook his head repeatedly, his face filled with sorrow. The Gleman family has always followed a traditional way of governing their territory, entrusting villages and towns to us, these ancient native families. This is merely a small reward for our loyalty. We are an extension of the Lord's power, diligently collecting taxes for him and adjudicating various disputes in the villages. We ensure the smooth operation of all affairs within the territory, and now, cough cough cough, the old man, overcome with emotion, coughed violently. The young man hurriedly came over to pat his back. Alice, I'm getting old. I never imagined that in my twilight years, the Gleman family would produce such an outrageous lord. He disregards the loyalty we've shown for centuries, trying to steal our glory, our status, our wealth, and our prestige in the village. Hearing the old man's words, the young man fell silent, his eyelids lowered, seemingly engaged in a complex internal struggle. Although I shouldn't speak ill of my lord, what is Earl Gleman's behavior if not ingratitude? He's forgotten how his family secured its position as lord, he's forgotten how his family amassed its wealth, he's forgotten who protected his family's honor. The old man trembled as he spoke. He turned to his grandson, looking at him with hope. My child, your father must have spoken to you. The young man's body trembled again. No, I can't do that. I swore an oath to the Lord to be loyal to him for life. His voice trembled as much as his body, filled with fear and struggle. Don't force me, don't force me. Seeing his grandson like this, the old man slammed his cane down hard on the ground, the sound echoing loudly in the small room. Loyalty has prerequisites. What's the point of one-sided loyalty? Now that Earl Gleman has betrayed us, continuing to be loyal to him would be self-degrading. Even the merciful father wouldn't forgive someone who despises themselves. The young man's eyes widened in fear, filled with helplessness. You're forcing me. You're forcing me. This isn't forcing you. Remember, you're fighting for the honor of your family. We were born into this family, raised by this family, nurtured by this family, and made what we are. We must fight to protect it. He went to the young man's side and gently stroked his back, calming him down. I know this is a difficult choice, but among the families allied with us, only you are capable of shouldering this responsibility. Chapter 525 Circuit Court. My child, seeing his grandson still hesitating, the old man's tone became urgent. Haven't you noticed? Paul Gleman has fallen. His body has been corrupted and possessed by some unknown evil. His once noble soul is no longer pure. Our Lord has become the devil's mouthpiece in the world. He'll bring disaster upon himself sooner or later. He already is. Isn't our family's fate proof enough? The old man said bitterly. If it were merely the appropriation of wealth, that would be one thing. There are many lords in the world who exploit their people to the bone. What can we do? We can only hope that his descendants won't be as greedy as his father. But Paul Gleman has also humiliated us in every way. The young man shook his head in disbelief. No, Earl Gleman is a very easygoing person. How could he humiliate others for no reason? Oh, my child, the old man said, adopting a more earnest tone. For truly treacherous people, they wouldn't stoop to a brute's insult to your face. They're more interested in stabbing you in the back with a sharp dagger. They outwardly respect you, befriend you, even flatter you, but in private, they bare their fangs like vipers, defaming your reputation, ruining your prestige, and making your name infamous among the people. The young man murmured, has our Lord ever done such a thing? Did he? The old man chuckled, then said sarcastically, he does it every single day. My child, do you know about the circuit court? I know. The old man slammed his cane down again. The existence of this so-called circuit court is an insult to us. As long as it exists, we suffer humiliation. How can this be? As you know, our family has been the rulers of this village since ancient times. Whenever the villagers have disputes, they come to us for adjudication. This is due to the prestige accumulated by our family over generations. People trust our prestige, believe in our fairness, and accept our order. Therefore, our family naturally has the right to adjudicate in this place. We have the right to punish those who have made mistakes, and we even have the right to execute those who have committed crimes. However, since Paul Gleman established a circuit court, these natural powers in our hands have been gradually stripped away. Almost every law he has promulgated is aimed at us. Those villains who should have died still need to be personally interrogated and convicted by the Lord's judge, and the monthly inspections have overturned most of the established precedents. How many villains and hooligans have been released by the circuit court, allowing these scum to continue to disrupt our peaceful lives? More importantly, this is a heavy blow to our family's prestige. Our words no longer carry weight in the village. Those ignorant peasants no longer regard our words as truth. Instead, they kneel before a greater authority in Lake Town. Could there be a greater humiliation than this? Cough, cough, cough. At this point, the old man coughed again, agitated. Do you know, he grabbed his bewildered grandson with such force that the young man even wondered if his grandfather had become younger. Just a month ago, The head of this family, the oldest person in this village, your grandfather, was severely humiliated by the circuit court. The young man supported his agitated grandfather to prevent him from falling, asking in surprise, what exactly happened, a month ago? I gathered the entire village in the open space at the village entrance, intending to publicly punish 3 thugs who had evaded debts. The young man asked, did they owe our family money? But he immediately realized he was asking redundantly. His family was probably the only one in the village capable of lending money. Yes, his grandfather answered matter-of-factly. Debts must be repaid, that's a natural principle. And these 3 scoundrels actually planned to run away and never pay back. What kind of good thing is that? The young man couldn't help but ask, where are they going to run off to? The old man spat on the ground. Bah, they're going to the city to work, a bunch of lowlifes. Ah, this is another major crime of Paul Gleman's. What kind of factory attracts a bunch of lowly people to the city? If this continues, who will farm the land? Won't the fields in the countryside become barren? Humph, the old man turned the topic back to the insult he had suffered. I had my servants tie up those 3 scoundrels, first whipping them, and then announcing that they would stay at home to work and pay off their debts. This has been done since ancient times for those who owe money and run away. But the families of the 3 scoundrels actually went to the circuit court and prevented me from punishing them. Is there any justice in this world? Is there any justice in this world? The old man loudly questioned the air in front of him, as if Paul Gleman himself were standing there. Why? The circuit court shouldn't be like this, the young man asked. The old man said angrily, the circuit court said the interest rate we set exceeded the Lord's limit and was usury. To hell with usury, son. Go ask the nearby villages if there are any other lenders offering lower rates than our family. We offered such low rates out of kindness and compassion, and yet the Lord has accused us of wrongdoing. Do you know how the circuit court officials handled it? At first, I stopped their unreasonable demands by citing inviolable sacred traditions. The first time, only 3 of them came, and after I rebuked them and they ran out of arguments, they left. But in the afternoon, a full 60 of them arrived, most of them so-called police, fully armed with gleaming swords. Our peaceful family has never seen anything like this before. They barked into our manor rudely and savagely, claiming to be the Lord, and robbed those 3 scoundrels who refused to pay their debts. Good heavens, this happened in broad daylight, in front of the entire village of over 600 people. At this point, the old man covered his face with his withered hands. I've completely lost face. This is a slap in my face, a slap in the face of my entire family, the prestige my family has built in the village for hundreds of years, all gone in a single day. Alice, the old man sighed painfully. The young man fell into a long silence. Go and talk to your father again, son. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.